Chapter 217. Every day, she would heal her injuries, cultivate and study the notes Mo Yaoqing left behind. Mo Tiange only felt that time flew by. In the blink of an eye, several years had passed just like that. She had a temperament that could endure loneliness. She had also been in closed-door meditation for several years before, so now that she was immersed in Mo Yaoqing's cultivation experiences, she didn't find it difficult at all. In any case, she just considered it closed-door meditation. It was common for foundation-building cultivators to be in closed-door meditation for several years or even dozens of years. Wei Haolan was also like this. She spent most of her time healing and refining the dead aura. Occasionally, she chatted with Mo Tiange about some matters related to the group, which allowed Mo Tiange to learn more about Bichuan Court's situation. Presumably, Wei Haolan also did this deliberately. She shouldered the heavy responsibility of rebuilding Bichuan Court, but Xia Qing and Tang Xin couldn't share this responsibility with her. Mo Tiange, on the other hand, was appointed by the two elders to help her rebuild the group in the future, so she had to have a rough understanding of the group's situation. Xia Qing also sometimes talked about pill concocting with her. She was a simple-minded person, so even in this kind of situation, she was still thinking about pill concocting. As for Tang Xin, he obviously didn't have enough patience. His cultivation level was only in the early stage of the foundation building realm, and he wasn't very old, so presumably, he spent very little time in closed-door meditation after building his foundation. However, he also knew how to be patient because of his great hatred. In the beginning, he often couldn't concentrate on cultivating, but gradually, he was able to meditate for several days or even several months like them. As for Ren Yufeng, who was outside the pagoda, sometimes he didn't show up for a long time, so long that they thought he'd lost his patience, but then he suddenly appeared. In the beginning, Ren Yufeng was still interested in showing off to the people inside the pagoda, but they never paid attention to him. Later, he got tired of it and simply occupied Bichuan Court's monastery, playing the game of founding a sect. He captured the individual cultivators in the vicinity and some former Bichuan Court cultivators, called it Divine Dragon Sect, and proclaimed himself the sect head. For the sake of survival, these cultivators all became yes-men. This greatly satisfied Ren Yufeng, so he simply became the sect head of Divine Dragon Sect. He only sent 2 cultivators to guard the entrance of the Dao Achieving Pagoda and no longer paid attention to them. Mo Tiange remembered that when Ren Yufeng first gathered people outside the Dao Achieving Pagoda to hold the so-called sect-establishing ceremony, Wei Haolan looked at the crowd below with tears in her eyes. She saw her loved ones among these people. Their figures were thin and frail, their bodies covered in scars. They must have suffered great torment, looking like walking corpses. She once asked Wei Haolan roughly how many Bichuan Court cultivators were still alive. Wei Haolan was silent for a long time. In the end, she said, "Perhaps there are still a lot of people alive, but after being tortured like this, I'm afraid they don't even have the least bit of self-respect left. It's not difficult to rebuild the sect and call back the disciples, but it's very difficult to restore the confidence they once had as cultivators." Mo Tiange was speechless. She didn't have any management skills, so she couldn't help. Year after year, time flowed like water. Finally, 10 years later, Mo Tiange completely dissolved all the dead aura and returned to her peak state. She then devoted herself wholeheartedly to cultivating. The teleportation formation on the 4th floor was still closed, and there was no news from the 2 elders. The 4 of them had no choice but to wait. After another 5 years, with the support of Xia Qing's medicinal pills, Tang Xin finally advanced to the middle stage of the foundation building realm, bringing a trace of joy to the Dao Achieving Pagoda that had been dull for more than 10 years. To encourage everyone, Wei Haolan suggested they take a day off to celebrate with Tang Xin. However, they'd been locked up in the pagoda for more than 10 years, so they couldn't hold any banquets. Fortunately, Wei Haolan left some good wine in her Qiankuan bag, so they could use it to make up for the occasion. Junior Marshall Brother Tang, it's your happy occasion, so you should drink a bit more today. Wei Haolan urged him to drink with a smile. Xia Qing also temporarily put aside pill concocting and nodded repeatedly. That's right. Senior Marshal Brother Tang, it's only been more than 10 years since you advanced to the middle stage, right? Advancing to the middle stage in 30 years is really amazing. Tang Shen touched his nose somewhat embarrassedly and said, if I wasn't locked up in the pagoda and could only restrain my thoughts, I wouldn't have advanced so quickly. Besides, Junior Marshal Sister Xia has been concocting medicinal pills for me, fellow Daoist Yi has been explaining her experiences to me, and Senior Marshal Sister Sect Head has often comforted me. It's all thanks to all of you that I can advance so quickly. After more than 10 years of devoted cultivation, although he was still thin-skinned, he no longer blushed easily and his temperament also became a lot calmer. Wei Haolan said with a smile, this is all we can do. You still have to rely on yourself to cultivate. Junior Marshal Brother Tang, you're not even 60 years old yet, but you're already in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. You're indeed one of the best talents in our Bishuan court. Tang Shen smiled, but his expression soon turned gloomy again. Bishuan court only has us left. Wei Haolan and Xia Qing were both silent upon hearing what he said. Outside the Dao Achieving Pagoda, cultivators occasionally came and went, but they were no longer Bishuan court disciples. Soon, however, Wei Haolan forced a smile and said, what's there to be afraid of? When the two elders come out of closed-door meditation and eliminate that devil cultivator, we can naturally rebuild the group. Besides, many of the original disciples are still here, we can just call them back when the time comes. Tang Shen also realized he shouldn't have mentioned this matter, so he also smiled and chimed in, right. What Senior Marshal Sister Sect Head said is right, we can just go out and rebuild the group. Come, let's drink. As he said that, Tang Shen gulped down a cup of wine. Unexpectedly, he didn't know how to drink, and this wine was quite spicy, so his expression immediately became distorted, looking extremely wonderful. Upon seeing his expression, the three women present all laughed. This was Bishuan Court's most popular handsome man, young Master Tang Shen. He was always graceful, gentle, and refined. When had he ever lost his composure like this? Junior Marshal Brother Tang, if you can't drink, just drink a little less. Come, wipe your mouth. Wei Haolan handed him a towel, but she still couldn't help but look at him with a smile. She said he was a lot calmer now, but he still couldn't help but blush. With great difficulty, Tang Shen finally managed to swallow the wine. He took the towel then coughed while wiping the spilled wine. I've made Senior Marshal Sisters and Junior Marshal Sisters laugh at me. Xia Qing waved her hand. Senior Marshal Brother Tang, this is nothing. Previously, I secretly smeared 3 leaves golden sunflower powder on Senior Marshal Sister Hua's medicinal pills. Senior Marshal Sister Hua's expression was truly wonderful. 3-leafed golden sunflower was a kind of commonly seen spiritual medicine. It didn't have much use, but it was very spicy. Just a little bit of it would make people who couldn't eat spicy food feel like their mouths were on fire. Mo Tiange once used it as a seasoning, so she was very clear about it. Upon hearing what Xia Qing said, Mo Tiange asked, is the Senior Marshal Sister Hua you're talking about that fellow Daoist Hua Yilin? Yes, Xia Qing said with a disdainful expression. I don't like Senior Marshal Sister Hua. She always likes to put on airs and even gives me that attitude. She never thought that her medicinal pills were in my hands. At this point, Xia Qing's expression turned gloomy. In the past, I wasn't sensible and always thought Senior Marshal Sister Hua was hateful, so I wanted to embarrass her whenever I had the chance. In fact, Senior Marshal Sister Hua didn't do anything bad, she was just a bit arrogant and despotic. I wonder how she's doing now. The atmosphere once again turned silent. Even though they were forcing themselves to smile, they still remembered their sorrowful past from time to time. Let's not talk about this. This time, it was Tang Xin who spoke. He turned towards Wei Haolan. Senior Martial Sister Sect Head, are your injuries healed? Wei Haolan nodded with a smile. They're almost healed. The dead aura has been dissolved. In the future, as long as I slowly meditate and recuperate, my injuries will naturally heal. Xia Qing said, Senior Martial Sister Sect Head, during this period of time, I'll concoct another batch of healing medicinal pills for you. You mustn't be reluctant to take them. If you're not well, Bishuan Court is not well, you have to cherish yourself. Yes. Tang Xin took over. In the past, I wasn't sensible and always caused trouble for Senior Martial Sister Sect Head. In the future, I'll definitely cultivate diligently. Wei Haolan smiled. Her smile was filled with joy. You're all sensible now. That's good. Her gaze then shifted towards Mo Tiange, who had been silent all this time. Fellow Daoist Yi, these past few years, thanks to you often teaching Junior Martial Brother Tang. I'm afraid Junior Martial Sister Xia and I don't have any hope of advancing to the core formation realm, so we can only count on you and Junior Martial Brother Tang. Mo Tiange showed a faint smile. It's nothing. I'm now Bishuan Court's guest elder, so I naturally have to do my part. In fact, Tang Xin could be considered quite intelligent. He also had a pure yang constitution and decent spiritual roots. In the past, perhaps because of his flawed character, he was always unable to meditate and cultivate. In the past 10-odd years, he had to meditate even if he didn't want to. Moreover, he was stimulated by his great hatred, so he constantly reminded himself to be strong, so he grew very fast. Mo Tiange reckoned that even if he couldn't form his nascent soul, forming his core shouldn't be a problem. Yes, fellow Daoist Yi is now one of us. Xia Qing interrupted, therefore, fellow Daoist Yi, you mustn't hide anything. We should discuss pill concocting issues more often. Xia Qing once again changed the topic to pill concocting out of habit, causing the other three people to laugh. Wei Haolan paused for a moment then said, since fellow Daoist Yi is one of us, wouldn't it be too distant for us to still call her fellow Daoist Yi? That's true, Xia Qing said, but I seem to have heard the two elders call fellow Daoist Yi something before. It's been too long, so I can't remember. The corners of Mo Tiange's mouth curved into a smile. My original surname was Mo, and my name was Tiange. Oh. Right, it seems to be Tiange. Fellow Daoist Yi, why did you use a fake name? Oh, no, let's just call her Senior Martial Sister Mo from now on. Yi Xiaotian isn't a fake name. This was the first time she explained the problem of names to others. Mo is my mother's surname, while my father's surname is Yi. Yi Xiaotian was the name my uncle gave me. Yi, Mo, Xia Qing thought for a moment. Both are good, but since Mo Tiange is her original name, let's just call her Senior Martial Sister Mo from now on, okay? It's hard to say who's older and who's younger. Yi Haolan knew Mo Tiange's background, so she said with a smile, Junior Martial Sister Xia, in terms of cultivation level, you have to call me Senior Martial Sister. In terms of age, you should count your years first. And I don't need to count my years. To you, I'm already an old woman. Senior Martial Sister, you're only 100 years old. How are you old? Xia Qing spoke quickly. Right now. I think I'm 53. I also know Senior Martial Brother Tang. You're older than me, by 6 years. You should be 59 now, right? Tang Xin nodded with a smile. Senior Martial Sister Mo, what about you? Mo Tiange said with a smile, in that case, you really have to call me Senior Martial Sister. I'm 55 now, so I'm 2 years older than you. Ah! Xia Qing was astonished. Even Tang Shen's eyes widened. Since they were injured and hid inside the Tao Achieving Pagoda, Mo Tiange didn't need to hide her cultivation level anymore. Therefore, Xia Qing and Tang Shen already knew she was a late-stage foundation-building cultivator, but since the two elders and Wei Haolan didn't care, they didn't say anything. It was also because of this that Xia Qing called Mo Tiange senior martial sister, as if it was a matter of course. She was 55 now, and they had been hiding inside the Tao Achieving Pagoda for 16 years. Didn't that mean she was only 39 years old back then? A 39-year-old late-stage foundation-building cultivator, this was indeed astonishing. Tang Shen was the first to regain his train of thought. He said sincerely, "It turns out fellow Daoist Yi is such a genius. I was really rude." Other people didn't know, but Mo Tiange understood the hidden meaning in his words. However, this matter was Tang Shen's misunderstanding. Back then, Mo Tiange rejected his dual cultivation proposal not because she thought his aptitude wasn't good enough for her, but because she didn't want to perform dual cultivation with him. Chapter 218. Mo Tiange didn't explain. In any case, the dual cultivation proposal had long been rejected, and she wouldn't have anything to do with Tang Shen in the future, so there was no need to explain. Tang Shen also didn't mention it. He just smiled and said, "That being the case, I'd better call you Senior Martial Sister." Senior Martial Sister Mo is so young, but you already have such a high cultivation level, it's only right to call you Senior Martial Sister. In the cultivation world, seniority wasn't determined by age. Only people who had a very close relationship, such as fellow disciples, would be determined by age. Even after their cultivation levels increased, they still addressed each other like that to show respect. They'd lived together in this pagoda for more than 10 years. Although they spent most of their time doing their own things, their relationship wasn't like ordinary people's, so they talked about age. Now that he learned Mo Tiange's cultivation level was so much higher than his, Tang Shen sincerely felt he should call her Senior Martial Sister. Xia Qing said, "In any case, I should call you Senior Martial Sister." Senior Martial Sister Mo, you're so awesome, so you have to take care of me in the future. Junior Martial Sister Xia. Wei Haolan gave her a sidelong glance and also smiled. That's true. Fellow Daoist Yi is now a guest elder of Bishuan Court, so you have to take care of us. Mo Tiange waved her hand. Please don't laugh at me. I'm just relying on the shadow of my elders. Wei Haolan was about to speak, but the four of them suddenly felt a spiritual aura fluctuation. They stopped and turned to look at the transporting formation at the same time. The transporting formation flashed, and Elder Qingyi's voice came, "The four of you, come up." Hearing the elder's voice again after 15 years, the four of them couldn't help but feel excited. Wei Haolan pressed her chest to calm her excitement and said, "It seems the two elders have come out of closed-door meditation. Let's go up to see them." Of course, no one had any objections. The four of them put down their wine cups, stood up, and walked towards the transporting formation. During these 15 years, the transporting formation had been closed. Now that it was open and they were summoned, the two elders must have come out of closed-door meditation. Standing on the transporting formation, there was a flash of light, and the four of them appeared on the 4th floor. Although they were eager to see the two elders, the three of them didn't dare to look up. They all knew the consequences of the two elders cultivating the blood prohibition secret technique. Although they had 15 years to prepare, seeing it with their own eyes was a different matter. Therefore, Mo Tiange was the first to see the two elders' appearances. The two elders were sitting side by side on the praying mats at the head of the table. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but they had put on their cloaks and veils. The veil and cloak not only blocked their vision, but also blocked their divine sense. The two elders' cultivation was higher than theirs, so they couldn't see their real appearances. Greetings to the two elders. Mo Tiange was the first to greet them. She could also be considered a member of Bishuan court now, so she no longer needed to call her senior. Hearing that there was nothing unusual in her voice, the other three raised their heads. Their eyes were filled with relief, but also sadness. The two elders must have been afraid of scaring them, so they covered their appearances. Greetings, elders. Wei Haolan took the lead and saluted. Elder Qingyi nodded slightly. You've worked hard these past 15 years. Her voice, however, was much more hoarse than before. Wei Haolan respectfully replied, compared to the two elders, this little bit of hard work is nothing at all. You're a good child, Elder Qingmiao said. Elder Qingmiao took over the conversation. Although her appearance couldn't be seen, her voice was obviously aged. You don't need to blame yourselves. This is a responsibility we must bear as elders of Bishuan court. Tang Shen lowered his head and secretly wiped the corners of his eyes. Upon seeing him, Elder Qingyi said, Shen, you've made a realm breakthrough. Yes. Tang Shen lowered his head. I'm sorry, elders. I was too immature before. Elder Qingyi chuckled softly. Child, you've finally grown up. If your great-grandmother in the underworld knew about this, she'd definitely be happy. Tang Shen was Elder Qingxi's beloved grandson. Ever since he was a child, he grew up in front of the three elders. The two elders also regarded him as their junior. Now that they saw Tang Shen's cultivation level had advanced and he had also matured a lot, they felt very comforted. Tang Shen wiped his tears and answered with a low voice, yes. In the future, Shen will certainly cultivate diligently and won't disappoint the two elders and great-grandmother anymore. The two elders' gazes then shifted to the others. Elder Qingyi continued to ask, Haolan, Tiange, are your injuries healed? Yes, Wei Haolan answered. Wei Haolan answered, rest assured, elder. My injuries are almost healed. Elder Mo already dissolved my dead aura 5 years ago. Oh. Elder Qingmiao looked at Mo Tiange and said, Tiange, come up and let us have a look. Yes, Mo Tiange answered, then walked forward. Elder Qingmiao stretched out her hand like lightning, grabbing Mo Tiange's wrist and pouring her spiritual aura into it. Mo Tiange only felt pain and numbness in her meridians. Elder Qingmiao's spiritual aura was stronger than she imagined. It seemed to have reached the peak of the core formation realm. However, her spiritual aura was very strange. There was a kind of hidden mania that made her feel very uneasy. She looked down and saw her bare hands. They were as dry as an old tree, deathly pale and without any color of blood. They couldn't even be called hands anymore. Moreover, she remembered that when she first met this Elder Qingmiao 16 years ago, she still had a delicate and pretty face and her charm was still there. Even though she didn't have deep feelings for her like Wei Haolan and the other two, Mo Tiange still felt a bit sad. Although this was a world where benefits were paramount, it wasn't completely ruthless. Elder Qingmiao quickly released her hands and said with relief, very good. Tiange, not only are your injuries healed, but your spiritual aura is also much purer than before. Presumably, you've been very diligent these past dozen years. Mo Tiange retreated. Elders, you've contributed a lot. Since Junior has received your favor, should also do something for Bishuan court. If you can think that way, we really didn't misjudge you. Elder Qingyi nodded with a smile. Alright, I called you here for 2 reasons. First, we've finished practicing the blood prohibition secret technique and we're officially out of closed-door meditation today. Second, this isn't enough to deal with that devil cultivator, we still need to prepare some things. Elder, Wei Haolan said, if you need to prepare anything, just tell us. We'll definitely do it seriously. We need to prepare 2 things, Elder Qingyi said calmly. First, that devil cultivator's dead aura is really powerful. If you get touched by it, you probably won't be able to hold on. We searched for a long time and finally found a kind of talisman that can guard against this kind of dead aura. Therefore, in the following time, you need to put aside everything else and draw this kind of talisman, the more, the better. Elder, Xiaoqing said, we don't know how to draw talismans, how can we learn it in a short time? Then you'll learn until you can draw it. Elder Qingyi said without hesitation, as for the second thing, it's a magic weapon. You won't be able to help us with this, so only junior martial sister Qingmiao and I can refine it. None of them was a refining master. Refining tools was different from drawing talismans. No matter how lacking talisman paper and other materials were, they were still easy to obtain. Besides, the 7th floor of the Dao Achieving Pagoda was where Bishuan Court stored their treasures for several thousand years. The materials for refining tools, on the other hand, were much more precious, especially rare materials for magic weapons. They simply couldn't be wasted like this. Not bad. Elder Qingmiao passed her a jade slip. Haolan, later, go to the 7th floor and get the talisman paper and brush you need. Draw according to this. No matter how long it takes, you have to draw at least several hundred talismans. That way, we'll be able to deal with that devil cultivator. Yes, Wei Haolan answered. However, she hesitated for a moment and said, Elders, can you, hold on. Cultivating the second half of the blood prohibition secret technique meant death, but she didn't know how long it would take for her to die. Elder Qingyi said faintly, rest assured. We two old women won't dare to die until we get rid of any future troubles for you. Wei Haolan's gaze wavered, but she didn't dare to ask again. She just lowered her head and answered, yes. Tienge. Mo Tienge stepped forward. I'm here. Go with Haolan. Your pill concocting skills are outstanding. If there's any medicinal pills that might be helpful, just take the materials and refine them. Mo Tienge paused for a moment then cupped her hands. I understand. This was a way of expressing their trust in her. Not only did they let her enter the group's treasury, but they also let her take whatever she wanted. If she wasn't a trusted disciple, they wouldn't do this at all. Mo Tienge sighed inwardly. She felt her weakness had been found. She didn't think she was a kind person, but if someone treated her well, she'd want to repay them. The two elders treated her so well, how could she repay them? Not only was she determined to be their guest elder, but if she succeeded in her cultivation, she'd also have to take care of them often. All right, you two go back first. That's all. Yes. The four of them responded in unison. Xiaoqing and Tang Shen went back to the 3rd floor, while Mo Tienge and Wei Haolan went to the 7th floor. Influenced by the two elders, the two of them didn't say a word on the way. When they reached the 7th floor, Wei Haolan opened the restriction and said, Elder Mo, over there is the spiritual panacea area. You can take whatever you want and come back here to register. Okay. Mo Tienge looked around then nodded. 16 years ago, when they first hid inside the pagoda, the two elders brought her and Tang Shen up to the 7th floor. At that time, the two elders gave them a lot of medicinal pills and bestowed magic weapons to Tang Shen and Xiaoqing. Because they learned about her life experience, they also very generously gave her Mo Yaoqing's personal notes. Although the notes didn't seem as precious as the magic weapons, Wei Haolan said only the sect head and elders could read the patriarch's notes. Being willing to give them to her was already a huge favor. Moreover, the notes were more important to her than any magic weapons. Although the two elders treated her like this because they hoped she could help Wei Haolan rebuild Bishuan Court, kindness was kindness. Since she accepted it, she should repay them a little. Mo Tienge took a deep breath and quickly picked dozens of spiritual panaceas. She then found Wei Haolan and said, Sect head, I'm done. Oh. Wei Haolan was rummaging among the cinnabars and other things. Eventually, she found several jars of beast blood. Let's go. We can go down after we record them. Mo Tiange followed Wei Haolan to the altar table. She took out the register and recorded, but Mo Tiange raised her head to look at Mo Yaoqing's statue. Her great-grandmother had a rough life, but she had always been strong and unyielding, proud and self-reliant. If she knew that the sect she established was almost destroyed by a cultivator in the foundation-building realm who practiced evil methods, she would definitely be very angry, wouldn't she? However, while she was angry, she must also be very gratified. Although her disciples weren't as talented as her, they didn't lose her lofty and unyielding character. As long as her lofty character remained, Bishuan Court could still be rebuilt. Elder Mo, upon hearing Wei Haolan's voice, Mo Tiange regained her train of thought. What's wrong? Are you confident? Wei Haolan didn't look at her. Instead, she was fiddling with the jade slip in her hand. No. Mo Tiange answered honestly in front of Wei Haolan, I like to take matters into my own hands, but this time, I'm not capable of doing it. I'm not confident at all. However, it doesn't matter if we're not confident, it's fine as long as the two elders are confident. Correct. Wei Haolan also raised her head to look at the statue. She then knelt down softly. Patriarch, please bless Bishuan Court. We'll kill our enemies and take back our monastery. Chapter 219. Inside the Tao Achieving Pagoda, it was once again busy. The two elders were still in closed-door meditation, refining magic weapons. The four juniors were either concocting medicinal pills, healing injuries, or drawing talismans. Wei Haolan's injuries hadn't completely healed, and Xia Qing wasn't good at other things. Seeing this, Mo Tiange taught Xia Qing some special medicinal pill concocting techniques while she and Tang Xin took on talisman making. Now that they had a definite goal, the atmosphere inside the Tao Achieving Pagoda was tense, but it was also full of hope. The talismans the two elders talked about were high-grade talismans. Foundation-building cultivators could draw them, but they needed a long time to practice. The talisman paper and talisman water needed to make these talismans all needed special materials. To reduce the consumption of materials, Mo Tiange and Tang Xin both started practicing with low-grade talismans. Mo Tiange really didn't have any talent in talisman making. She was only talented in formations, but her pill concocting skills were so-so. Talisman making, on the other hand, was really out of talent. However, she had to draw talismans, so she had to immerse herself in practicing. Fortunately, Tang Xin's talent in talisman making was unexpectedly good, relieving her a lot of pressure. The fourth floor of the Tao Achieving Pagoda was closed again. The two elders concentrated on refining magic weapons, Wei Haolan meditated to heal her injuries, Xia Qing immersed herself in concocting medicinal pills, and Mo Tiange and Tang Xin focused on drawing talismans. Another 4 years went by as he prepared for this. In fact, Wei Haolan's injuries healed in the 3rd year, and Xia Qing also joined the ranks of talisman making in the 2nd year. 3 years later, Tang Xin finally succeeded in making this poison-resisting talisman. The two elders finally came out of their closed-door meditation after 4 years. The 6 people gathered again. Elder, is the magic weapon finished? Yes. Elder Qingyi's hoarse voice carried a hint of joy. After several failures, the magic weapon to deal with that devil cultivator is finally finished. The 4 juniors smiled at the same time. They had been trapped in this Tao Achieving Pagoda for 20 years, and they finally had a chance to leave. Although Mo Tiange didn't look too excited, she was very happy inside. This time, she only came out to experience the world for the sake of tempering her mental state. She didn't expect it would take her more than 20 years. She didn't know how Xianqing School was doing after she left for more than 20 years. Was that cheat master of hers still an unrefined old man? Had Jinji already built his foundation? Was everything safe and sound in her little cave residence? Thinking up to this point, she wished she could grow a pair of wings, directly cross demonic mountain range and fly back to Xianqing school. The Dao Attainment Pagoda, which had been closed for 20 years, was finally open. The two so-called Divine Dragon sect disciples guarding outside the pagoda were chatting happily as usual. They were sent to guard the Dao Achieving Pagoda, but they didn't have much to do for more than 10 years, so they'd long forgotten Ren Yufeng's instructions. Every day, they chatted and talked nonsense, drank, and gambled. When the Dao Attainment Pagoda's original transfer array lit up, two gamblers were still rolling the dice to bet on the ownership of this month's spirit stones. A group of 6 people appeared on the transporting formation. The 2 core formation elders smiled coldly. Elder Qingmiao waved her hand, causing a powerful spiritual aura pressure to cover them. The 2 low-level cultivators raised their heads in panic, and only then did they see the 6 people on the teleportation array. For a moment, their mouths were wide open, and they were speechless. They didn't have time to speak. Under the pressure, the 2 of them opened their eyes wide and blood flowed out of their 7 orifices. They silently fell to the ground. Humph. Elder Qingmiao humphed coldly. It's really shameful to send such a person to stand guard. Elder Qingyi said, don't worry about them, we'll do our own thing. Xia Qing, Shen, you two go gather the original Bishuan court disciples and inform them that we're out. If other individual cultivators surrender, we won't make things difficult for them, but if they're stubborn, kill them on the spot. Yes. Xia Qing and Tang Shen accepted the order. Haolan, Tianga, open the Great Mountain Protecting Formation. We mustn't let that devil cultivator escape. Yes. Elder Qingyi waved her hand. All right, let's split up. When you're done, gather in the conference hall. The 4 of them split into 2 groups and left after receiving the order. Bishuan Court's Great Mountain Protecting Formation was also set up by Mo Yaoqing years ago. With her exceptional aptitude, this Great Mountain Protecting Formation was extremely powerful. However, 20 years ago, Shengguan Yunhao harbored evil intentions. He colluded with Ren Yufeng and secretly closed the Great Mountain Protecting Formation, causing it to become useless. The 2 elders had long made a plan. On one hand, they'd gather the original disciples to kill Ren Yufeng. On the other hand, they'd open the Great Mountain Protecting Formation to hinder Ren Yufeng. By doing these 2 things well, the 2 of them would have more than an 80% chance of killing Ren Yufeng. Mo Tianga followed Wei Haolan and flew towards the Great Mountain Protecting Formation. They encountered many low-level disciples on the way, but the 2 of them ignored them all. Wei Haolan only stopped when they were far away from Bishuan Court's pavilions and saw a towering watchtower. Elder Mo, please lend me a hand. Mo Tianga nodded. The Great Mountain Protecting Formation was huge, so opening it by herself would inevitably be too much for her. Ren Yufeng had long been possessed by the devil. Even though he created the so-called Divine Dragon sect, it was nothing more than a secular world bandit occupying a mountain and acting like a king. It basically didn't look like a cultivation group at all. He also didn't understand the purpose of this Great Mountain Protecting Formation. Now, there was actually no one inside the watchtower. Mo Tianga's attainments in formations were incomparable to cultivators in the same realm as her. Wei Haolan took out the formation blueprint, and the 2 of them repaired it one by one according to the blueprint. After spending half a day, they finally finished repairing the damaged parts. Right now, they both sensed spiritual aura fluctuations coming from inside Bishuan Court. The 2 of them must have started fighting against Ren Yufeng. The 2 of them were a bit worried. After sensing with rapt attention for a while, Mo Tianga said, the 2 elders should be fine. The dead aura in this spiritual aura fluctuation isn't strong. Presumably, the 2 elders suppressed it. Wei Haolan looked at her with a bit of astonishment then nodded. Bishuan Court had a circumference of several hundred miles, and their current location was also several hundred miles away from the inner part of Bishuan Court. Mo Tiange's divine sense must have been very strong to be able to sense it. Wei Haolan thought to herself that the two elders indeed had extraordinary foresight. This elder Mo was so young, but she already had this kind of ability. Presumably, she'd advance to the core formation realm soon. In that case, although this elder Mo wouldn't stay in Linhai for long, she'd definitely take care of Bishuan Court if she had spare energy in the future. The two of them had their own thoughts as they buried themselves in replenishing the spirit stones. The operation of this great mountain protecting formation required a lot of spirit stones. These past few years, the formation had been in a half-useless state, so the spirit stones had long been taken away. Mo Tiange and Wei Haolan busied themselves for a long time before they finally replenished all the spirit stones. Before long, Wei Haolan activated the great mountain protecting formation. A loud, buzzing sound came from inside the watchtower, and a white light shone, illuminating the entire watchtower in an instant. Following this sound, a layer of misty fog appeared above Bishuan Court. This fog became thicker and thicker, gradually forming a defensive barrier. Bishuan Court's great mountain protecting formation had been completely activated. Everyone inside the formation was under its protection. At the same time, it also closed all the entrances and exits. Upon seeing that the great formation had been activated, Wei Haolan said, "Elder Mo, let's go and help." Mo Tiange nodded. Aside from killing Ren Yufeng, there were too many things they needed to do. Although Xia Qing and Tang Xin were a lot stronger than they were 20 years ago, no one knew whether accidents would happen or not. The two of them stepped onto their respective flying magic weapons and flew towards the inner part of Bishuan Court. At that moment, Bishuan Court was already in chaos. The spiritual aura fluctuations were getting stronger and stronger. Presumably, the two elders were fighting desperately against Ren Yufeng. As for the so-called Divine Dragon sect disciples gathered by Ren Yufeng, not all of them were Bishuan Court's original disciples, there were also some individual cultivators among them. Some of them were even covered in dead aura like Ren Yufeng, but they weren't as strong. Upon seeing this, Mo Tiange and Wei Haolan each took out the poison-resisting talismans they'd prepared. Their divine senses sensed Xia Qing and Tang Xin's positions, then they flew over together. In the distance, they saw Xia Qing and Tang Xin fighting against some people. There were 2 early-stage foundation-building disciples and a dozen or so aura-refining disciples. All of them were covered in dead aura, so they were presumably Ren Yufeng's disciples and grand disciples. Senior Martial Sister Sect Head, Senior Martial Sister Mo. Xia Qing shouted when she saw the two of them. She and Tang Xin had poison-resisting talismans, so these people couldn't do anything to them. However, they weren't good at fights of magical powers, so they couldn't take down these people in a short time. Both Mo Tiange and Wei Haolan attacked. Wei Haolan summoned her cold ice mirror, releasing one ice spell after another from it. Mo Tiange, on the other hand, raised her hand. She controlled the shuttle of flying Apsara as if it was her own arm, moving gracefully like a swimming dragon. All these years, she studied Mo Yaoqing's notes inside the Dao Achieving Pagoda and learned a lot of fighting secrets, so her shuttle of flying Apsara was extremely sharp. Wherever the shuttle of flying Apsara went, corpses would fall one after another. The two foundation-building cultivators, on top of having to resist Wei Haolan's ice spell, also had to dodge the shuttle of flying Apsara, so they were flustered. Unfortunately, the 4 of them had poison-resisting talismans on them, so their dead aura couldn't break through them at all. Upon seeing this, Tang Xin and Xia Qing attacked the 2 cultivators with their magic tools without any hesitation. Before long, they killed them on the spot. After withdrawing their magic tools, Xia Qing came over and said, "Senior Martial Sisters, how are you?" "I'm fine." Wei Haolan looked around. Aside from the dozen or so devil cultivators they killed, there was no one else. Why isn't there anyone else? Did you deliver the message? Xia Qing answered dejectedly, this devil cultivator turned a lot of people into the same state as him. Their minds changed greatly and they simply wouldn't listen to our advice, so we had no choice but to kill them. There were also some people who were still rational, but they were too weak, so we told them to hide first. Wei Haolan frowned. Call them out. They're the clearest about the situation in the group now, so let them lead us to purge the devil cultivators. All right. Soon, they found the cultivators enslaved by Ren Yufeng. Among them were many former disciples of Bishuan court, and when they saw Wei Haolan, many of them burst into tears. These people had been bullied by Ren Yufeng for 20 years. Now that they could finally take revenge, they were overjoyed, so they led the 4 of them everywhere to purge the devil cultivators assimilated by Ren Yufeng. The 4 of them, Xia Qing, Tang Shen, Wei Haolan, and Mo Tiange, divided into 3 groups to purge the whole of Bishuan court. The dead aura of these devil cultivators was far inferior to Ren Yufeng's, but they also had poison-resisting talismans on them. Soon, the devil cultivators scattered in Bishuan court were completely purged. In the end, everyone shifted their gaze towards the center of Bishuan court, the place where the conference hall was located. The sky above the hall was firmly covered by the great mountain protecting formation. Under the defensive cover, Ren Yufeng, who was covered in black aura, was confronting the 2 elders. Chapter 220. Ren Yufeng stared at the huge Bishuan court under his feet. There were several hundred scattered cultivators standing inside, but none of them had dead aura. His face couldn't help but twist as he glared at the 2 elders in front of him. Old women, you ruined my plan. Elder Qingmiao stood with her whip in hand. Her face under her gauze hat was cold. Devil cultivator, you're about to die, yet you still dare to be so arrogant. About to die. Ren Yufeng cast them a contemptuous glance, and a hostile look appeared on his face. Even if I'm about to die, you'll still be my scapegoat. Humph. Elder Qingyi stared at him coldly and lowered her hand that was covering her chest. Since we can kill you, what's the big deal about us 2 old women dying? You killed my disciple and destroyed my Bishuan court. We martial sisters will properly settle this debt with you today. Ren Yufeng was arrogant. Ha! That depends on whether you have the ability or not. Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao no longer said anything. The 2 of them glanced at each other then began to cast spells. Their bodies emitted a bright red light that was as strong and gloomy as blood. The light became brighter and the color of blood also became more and more intense. Gradually, the light on their bodies fused together. Upon seeing this, Ren Yufeng didn't dare to be careless. He'd been fighting with the 2 elders for a while. He thought he could defeat them quickly with his divine technique, but in the end, he was surprised to find that he was still at a disadvantage. Although his mind wasn't normal, he didn't become stupid. He immediately understood that the 2 elders must have cultivated some kind of secret technique in the Tao Achieving Pagoda, which was why their power could reach such a high level in just 20 years. Nevertheless, he didn't admit defeat. With the divine dragon's breath, he would soon advance to the nascent soul realm, then the deification realm, move unhindered in the human world, and ascend to become an immortal. What were these 2 old women? He could definitely kill them. With that thought in mind, the dead aura on Ren Yufeng's body surged, and his face under the black aura became increasingly ferocious. In an instant, the 3 of them moved. The 2 elders released their spiritual aura inside the red light, and Ren Yufeng's dead aura also surged towards them. The magic weapon the 2 elders refined for 4 years was called the Soul Restraining Whip. Ren Yufeng basically couldn't be considered a human anymore, he was as thin and withered as a skeleton. He basically didn't care about ordinary physical injuries, so they came up with this kind of magic weapon. This kind of magic weapon was specialized in attacking one's primordial spirit, so it was very difficult for Ren Yufeng to defend against it. His dead aura could protect his physical body, but it couldn't protect his primordial spirit. Just now, he'd already suffered many losses. The two elders advanced and retreated, but they no longer attacked and defended like before. Instead, they completely gave up on defense and attacked with all their might. The fight in the air was intense, and the people watching from below couldn't take their eyes off it. The outcome of this battle concerned their future. Would they continue to be enslaved, or would they be able to live like humans? Of course, he would choose the latter, but now was not the time for them to choose. They could only wait for the outcome of this battle. The red light and the black gas grew brighter and brighter until they could no longer see anything else. Many people were suffocated by the pressure. Wei Haolan glanced at them then shouted, "Junior Marshal Sister Xia, Junior Marshal Brother Tang, take them to a place farther away." Most of these people only had aura refining cultivation level, so how could they withstand this kind of pressure? Xia Qing and Tang Shen obeyed. However, before they could move, they saw Ren Yufeng, who was in the sky, suddenly stop. As if he heard Wei Haolan's voice, he turned around and rushed down. The two elders immediately followed him, but Ren Yufeng's speed was extremely fast, so they couldn't stop him for a while. Wei Haolan was shocked to see Mo Tiange in that direction, so she shouted, "Elder Mo." Mo Tiange could already feel the surging dead aura. Without saying anything, she took out another poison-resisting talisman and stuck it on her body. The white silk handkerchief was summoned, which instantly expanded to the size of a mat and floated towards Ren Yufeng. When Ren Yufeng saw her, a trace of hatred appeared on his face covered by the black gas. He actually didn't look at anyone else and rushed towards her. Mo Tiange hastily retreated. With the white silk handkerchief in front of her and her cloud-treading boots, she heard faint sounds of wind and thunder. In an instant, she disappeared from her original spot and reappeared several dozen feet behind Ren Yufeng. This was the teleportation technique engraved on the stone wall in Ziwei's Immortal's cave. Wanderer Ziwei had perfected it, so foundation building cultivators could also practice it. It was the only complete technique on the stone wall. In the past 20 years, Mo Tiange had been comprehending it for a long time, so she could finally use it. Ren Yufeng obviously hadn't seen it before, so he was stunned for a moment. Right at that moment, the two elders caught up to him. Their soul-confining whips attacked Ren Yufeng at the same time. Ah! Ren Yufeng couldn't concentrate and was hit head-on, causing him to scream miserably. After being hit, he turned around and glared fiercely at Mo Tiange. His dead aura surged. Nevertheless, the two elders didn't give him any time to rest. They used their secret technique at the same time. The soul-confining whips flashed with a blood-red light and struck him again. Ren Yufeng refused to accept his death. He gathered his dead aura and started to fight again. Mo Tiange quietly landed. When she saw that all the low-level cultivators around her had retreated, she heaved a sigh of relief. She signaled Wei Haolan, and the two of them also retreated a bit further. They were very clear about the cultivation levels of the two elders, they were already at the peak of the core formation realm. As for the dead aura on Ren Yufeng's body, it was obviously much denser than it was 20 years ago. This battle could be said to be the fiercest among cultivators below the nascent soul realm. It was no longer something cultivators at their level could meddle in. They couldn't even clearly see how the two sides fought. They could only see the dead aura and the red light entangling with each other, and the spiritual aura fluctuations were frighteningly strong. Mo Tiange couldn't help but recall the scene during Martial Uncle Xuanin's nascent soul ceremony. Martial Uncle Xinyang and her master joined hands to fight against Master Song Feng. Although their momentum wasn't as strong, the intensity of their fight was much higher. After all, nascent soul cultivators cherished their lives, but today, they were fighting with their lives on the line. Look! Wei Haolan pointed at the sky. The three people who were fighting were emitting a bright red light, completely enveloping the black aura. Mo Tiange and Wei Haolan glanced at each other. Both of them were delighted. However, the black aura slowly spread and almost overwhelmed the red light. This battle was in a stalemate, causing Mo Tiange and Wei Haolan to tremble with fear. What if they lost? They didn't dare to think about the consequences. If they lost, the two elders would die, Bishuan Court wouldn't be able to be rebuilt, and they would experience another bloodbath. As she thought about this, Mo Tiange lowered her head to look at her hands. The dead aura on her body had already dissipated, so if the situation wasn't good, she could enter the virtual sky world to hide. However, they'd been in trouble together for 20 years, and she'd witnessed the two elders losing their lives. She didn't want this to be the end. Elder! Wei Haolan suddenly called out. Mo Tiange looked up and saw that the black aura in the sky was getting thicker and thicker, making her heart tighten. At the same time, she prepared herself. If the two elders really lost, she'd take Wei Haolan into the virtual sky world to hide for a while. However, just as the red light was being compressed to the point where there was almost no space for it to exist, it suddenly exploded. At the same time, they heard Elder Qingyi shout, "Die!" The red light was like blood. It sprayed forward and suddenly exploded the black aura. Ah! Ren Yufeng screamed. He couldn't control the black aura on his body anymore. Like ink dissolving into water, it slowly faded away. Puff! 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 In midair, the three of them fell one after another. Their momentum dispersed, and their spiritual aura gradually dissipated. They no longer had the spiritual aura pressure of a peak stage core formation cultivator. Mo Tiange and Wei Haolan watched for a while, but the three of them remained motionless. In the end, they couldn't help but run over. Elder! Elder! Wei Haolan rushed over. Her gauze hat fell off. Her withered face didn't have any luster, it was like a withered old tree, rough and dim. Elder Qingyi opened her eyes with difficulty and looked towards Ren Yufeng. When she saw that the black aura on his body had dissipated and he was motionless, she finally revealed a smile. She glanced at Elder Qingmiao, who was also speechless, then both of them closed their eyes with smiles on their faces. Elder! Wei Haolan shouted loudly with grief in her eyes. Mo Tiange stared at Mo Tiange, then pressed her shoulder and shook her head at her. The two elders were beyond saving. How could Wei Haolan not know? She just found it hard to accept. Seeing her like this, Mo Tiange knew she needed time to accept, so she retreated and walked towards Ren Yufeng. Before she met Ren Yufeng, she never thought she'd be suppressed by a person to the point where she practically had no way out. A cultivator without any background and even without any talent actually made her spend 20 years with no way out. She mustn't look down on anyone. In this cultivation world full of variables, maybe an aura refining cultivator you look down on would be much stronger than you in the future. She heaved a long sigh, then picked up Ren Yufeng's Qinquan bag, then threw out a fire talisman, burning Ren Yufeng's corpse into ashes. She then raised her head to look at the dead aura that hadn't dispersed yet and frowned. This dead aura wouldn't disperse in a short time. Apparently, it would be a very long time before other people could set foot in this place. Xia Qing and Tang Xin ran over. When they saw the two elders' corpses, they were both dumbfounded. Elder, Wei Haolan stood up and calmly wiped the tears on her face. Elders done what they wanted to do. Now, it's our turn. Senior Martial Sister, Junior Martial Sister Xia, collect the elders' corpses and send them to the Tao Achieving Pagoda. Junior Marshal Brother Tang, regardless of whether they're Bishuan Court disciples or not, tell everyone to gather at the monastery gate. Yes. Xia Qing and Tang Shen both stood up and did as Wei Haolan ordered. Elder Mo Wei Haolan looked at Mo Tiange. The two elders already passed away, so you're the only elder left in Bishuan Court now. Please come with me to comfort the disciples. All right, I'll naturally obey. Tang Shen moved very quickly. Within the time it takes for a stick of incense to burn, all the cultivators in Bishuan Court had already arrived at the monastery gate. Some people cheered jubilantly, while some people were anxious and fearful. The ones cheering jubilantly were the former Bishuan Court disciples who'd been tortured for the past 20 years and had finally waited for this day. The ones who were anxious and fearful were the individual cultivators accepted by Ren Yufeng. Almost all of them were male cultivators. When Bishuan Court was still around, although they weren't bullied or humiliated, they didn't have the chance to stand out. At first, they were happy about Bishuan Court's extermination, but later on, they discovered that having a cultivation group wasn't so wonderful. Wei Haolan's expression was cold. She was flying in the air, overlooking the numerous cultivators below her. She said, "Disciples, Bishuan Court has gone through a calamity, but in the end, Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmia sacrificed their lives to eliminate our enemy. From today onwards, Bishuan Court will be re-established, and all of you will return to the cultivation group." Before she could finish speaking, the Bishuan Court disciples below her already started cheering. They'd been waiting for this day for too long. Wei Haolan raised her hand, silencing their voices. In addition, as the sect head of Bishuan Court, I hereby announce that Bishuan Court is no longer a cultivation group for female cultivators. Regardless of whether they're male or female, as long as they pass the test, they can become official disciples. This news instantly caused an uproar among the crowd. All the male cultivators who weren't Bishuan Court disciples stared fixedly at Wei Haolan. Among them, the former Bishuan Court Foundation building female cultivators even cried out involuntarily, "Senior Marshal Sister Sect Head." Wei Haolan merely glanced at them indifferently. "These are the two elders' final orders." She then turned towards the others. "For those who aren't Bishuan Court disciples, we'll let bygones be bygones as long as they didn't bully us. 2 days later, Bishuan Court will hold its reconstruction ceremony, and at the same time, will recruit new disciples." Chapter 221. Wei Haolan's announcement set off a storm in Linhai. As a cultivation group for female cultivators, Bishuan Court had been in Linhai for several thousand years. Everyone had long been accustomed to it and accepted their fate. Now that they learned Bishuan Court was going to recruit disciples, all the male cultivators in Linhai were delighted. Bishuan Court's female cultivators, on the other hand, felt a bit lost because this also meant they wouldn't have any privileges anymore. Senior Marshal Sister Sect Head. Someone came to the door that very night. Mo Tiange and Wei Haolan were discussing important matters when they heard the voice outside, causing them to glance at each other. There were 1,000 things waiting to be done. The main hall was temporarily sealed, so they were now in an ordinary room without any disciples guarding the door. Seeing that Mo Tiange didn't have any objections, Wei Haolan waved her hand to remove the soundproof barrier. "Come in." The person who entered was Senior Marshal Sister Yang, who once fought with that unruly young Miss Hua Yilin out of jealousy. After Ren Yufeng was killed, Xia Qing brought the two elders' remains back to the Dao Achieving Pagoda to worship them. Afterward, everyone devoted themselves to rebuilding the group. The first thing they did was to recompile Bishuan Court's disciple roster. According to the disciples who stayed here, when Ren Yufeng suddenly appeared that year, they were all caught off guard. Some died, some ran away, but half of them didn't have time to escape. Many of them suffered extreme torture before they managed to survive. Fortunately, Ren Yufeng was infected by the dead aura and gradually lost his mortal desires. Otherwise, who knew how many disciples in a cultivation group for female cultivators would have been humiliated? However, when he recruited disciples later, he accepted everyone regardless of who they were, and there were also some people with bad conduct. Upon hearing this, Wei Haolan showed no mercy. As long as they were identified, they would all be beheaded. Fortunately, this kind of thing wasn't common. Among the individual cultivators they recruited, only a few of them lost their humanity like Ren Yufeng. Most of the Bishuan court disciples just suffered a bit but didn't suffer any humiliation. On one hand, she rewarded them, on the other hand, she displayed her might. Everyone, regardless of whether they were Bishuan court disciples or not, finally quieted down. Next, they had to deal with the specific matters of rebuilding the group. Senior Martial Sister Sect Head. After Senior Martial Sister Yang saluted, she didn't say anything and just stared at Imo Tiange. Wei Haolan said, Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao already decided to invite this fellow Daoist Yi to become our Bishuan court's guest elder. If you have something to say, just say it, there's no need to hide it. Not revealing her real name was also Imo Tiange's request. Since she used the name Yi Shaotian in Bishuan court, there was no need for her to keep changing it. Moreover, she hadn't reported this matter to her master yet, so it was better for her to keep a low profile. Wei Haolan didn't care about this matter, so she listened to her. Yes. Senior Martial Sister Yang took a few more glances at Imo Tiange then asked cautiously, Senior Martial Sister Sect Head, do you think our Bishuan court will no longer be a cultivation group for female cultivators from now on? Will the offerings and whatnot be reduced? Wei Haolan could not help but frown as she said, you don't have to worry about this matter. Before the two elders left, they had already come to an agreement. Oh, I see. Senior Martial Sister Yang let out a hollow laugh then cast a glance at Imo Tiange. In that case, since the two elders have passed away, shouldn't we elect another elder? Of course. Wei Haolan didn't hide anything. We'll elect 2 temporary elders. The 2 elders and I will be responsible for the main matters. As for the future, according to our group's rules, once a disciple forms his or her gold core, he or she will automatically be promoted to an elder. Without waiting for Senior Martial Sister Yang to ask again, Wei Haolan said bluntly, Junior Martial Sister Yang, there are too many things to do now that the group is being rebuilt. I really don't have time to answer these questions. If you're free, can you go and help Junior Martial Sister Xia and Junior Martial Brother Tang? Okay. Since the sect head ordered her to do so, what else could she do? After Senior Martial Sister Yang left, Wei Haolan angrily threw the new register on the table and said mockingly, I already said it wasn't difficult to recall the disciples, but it was very difficult to rebuild their self-esteem. Now, it seems I have to add another condition, it's even more difficult to make them set aside their selfishness for the time being. What kind of situation is this? The 2 elders have already passed away, but what kind of people are they saving? Imo Tiange tried to persuade her. No matter where you are, people like that are everywhere. Sect head, don't be too angry, the important matter is more important. Wei Haolan nodded. You're right. I just hate that they don't know what's important, it's really annoying. Then don't count on them. In any case, the 2 elders have already decided on these matters, so we just need to do as they say. When the 2 elders were mentioned, Wei Haolan was silent for a while. She then took a deep breath and pulled herself together. In 2 days, we'll cremate the 2 elders first and offer them to the patriarch. In the future, whenever there's incense from the patriarch, the 2 elders will have a share. Imo Tiange didn't have any objections. This should be done. Without the 2 elders, the group can't be rebuilt. In addition, Elder Yi, Wei Haolan changed the way she addressed Imo Tiange, I've already asked Junior Marshal Sister Xia and Junior Marshal Brother Tang to pick some reliable people to be in charge of recruiting disciples, but just in case, I still need you to establish your prestige. Mo Tiange nodded. Bishuan Court would no longer only recruit female disciples, so in the beginning, there would definitely be a mix of good and bad people, so it was necessary to intimidate them. As for the other matters, I have a lot of things to think about at the moment. Elder Yi, you've worked hard. Go and rest first, we still have a lot of things to do. Okay. Mo Tiange didn't refuse. She indeed wasn't good at school matters, and she couldn't help Wei Haolan for the time being. It would be better for her to go back and adjust her condition. She would also be able to intimidate those who were dissatisfied with her. After leaving Wei Haolan's room, Mo Tiange randomly chose a room in the building, laid a defensive formation, then entered the virtual sky world, which she hadn't seen in a long time. Inside the virtual sky world, the bamboo shadows rustled and the wind blew gently. It was no different from 20 years ago. In the beginning, she couldn't enter the virtual sky world, but later on, she didn't have the chance to. These 20 years were both simple and complicated. Inside the Tao Achieving Pagoda, aside from healing and cultivating, there was nothing else to do. However, in order to defeat Ren Yufeng, they made countless plans, which almost exhausted them both physically and mentally. Now, they were finally free. She dragged her exhausted body towards the small room. A golden dumpling ran out of the small room. As soon as it saw her, it pounced on her. Mo Tiange reached out to catch it, then stroked its head. Long time no see, Fei Fei. This Fei Fei, which was on the verge of making a realm breakthrough but had been left inside the virtual sky world for 20 years, was now finally in the second rank. Its fur had also turned from white to golden. Fei Fei arched itself in her arms. Although they hadn't seen each other for 20 years, they had signed a contract, so Fei Fei didn't alienate her in the slightest. After returning to the small room, Mo Tiange put Fei Fei down. I'm really too tired. Can you go and play first? Fei Fei seemed to understand her words and became much more intelligent than before. It stared at her with its black eyes for a while, then jumped onto her shoulder and put its paw on her head. In an instant, a warm current flowed from Fei Fei's paw. Mo Tiange felt warm all over, and in an instant, all her fatigue disappeared without a trace. Fei Fei could make people forget their worries. So it was true. After an unknown amount of time, Mo Tiange finally woke up. All the fatigue in her body disappeared without a trace, whether it was physical or mental. Fei Fei squeaked, then jumped down from her shoulder and arched itself in her arms to please her. Mo Tiange smiled and stroked its head. Thank you. Having received her praise, Fei Fei happily rolled around in her arms. Holding Fei Fei in her arms, Mo Tiange took out a Qinkuan bag from inside her robe and pondered. This was Ren Yufeng's Qinkuan bag. She put it away, but because she had too many things to do, she forgot to give it to Wei Haolan. Now that she was looking at this Qinkuan bag, an idea came to her mind. She put her hand inside and fumbled for a while. Finally, she took out a heavy stone tablet. This was the stone tablet Ren Yufeng obtained from the ancient sacrificial temple, the one that recorded the so-called divine dragon secret technique. On the surface, this stone tablet didn't seem abnormal, and the drawings on it were also very simple. At the very front was a drawing of a dragon skeleton and a person casting a spell. At the back, there were also drawings of many human bodies in some postures. There were also some patterns drawn inside the human bodies, which seemed to be spiritual aura circulation methods. In addition, there were also some simple words carved on the side, but these ancient characters had long been lost, so she couldn't make out their meaning. Strange, there didn't seem to be anything abnormal. She couldn't help but reach out to touch it, but the moment she touched the surface of the stone tablet's patterns, her whole body went numb. Then, many strange thoughts were transmitted from the stone tablet to her body. Many scenes appeared in her mind, dragons flying in the sky, fighting, corpses. In the end, a person standing on top of a dragon skeleton, absorbing the divine dragon's breath. The strange thing was, what he absorbed was black aura, and the divine dragon's breath on the dragon skeleton was getting stronger and stronger. She heard the sound of woo-woo. Fei suddenly jumped over and bit her finger. Tiange felt pain on her fingertip. She came back to her senses from her meditation and broke out in a cold sweat. Sure enough, there was something wrong with this so-called divine dragon's secret technique. It wasn't that the drawings were wrong, nor was it that her comprehension was wrong. This technique itself was a kind of evil technique. This stone tablet had a kind of wonderful power. As soon as she touched it, her mind would be completely attracted to it. If Fei hadn't woken her up from her fantasy in time, the consequences would have been too horrible to contemplate. Thinking up to this point, Tiange hugged Fei, feeling extremely grateful. Fortunately, you saved me. Thank you so much. Fei tilted its head and looked at her for a moment. It then jumped down and kicked the stone tablet away with its short hind legs. It then shook its head at her. This thing can't be touched. Tiange guessed its meaning from her divine comprehension. Fei whimpered twice, but it still approached her and put its hand on hers. That wonderful power appeared again, and very soon, Tiange regained her calmness. All right, I understand. The existence of the contract made them trust each other, so Tiange trusted Fei without any hesitation. She ignored the stone tablet and continued to search Ren Yufeng's Qinkuan bag. There were still a lot of things inside. Spirit stones, materials, magic tools. There wasn't anything special, there were just a lot of spirit stones and good materials, but the magic tools were very ordinary. Right. After Ren Yufeng cultivated the evil technique, he never used magic tools. His dead aura was his best means of attack. As for these spirit stones and materials, he must have plundered them in Linhai all these years, right? Spirit stones aside, there were a lot of beast cores and materials unique to the Eastern Sea, so that should be the case. Tiange thought about it and decided to return this Qinkuan bag to Wei Haolan. She didn't care about these materials, and she didn't lack spirit stones, but for Bishuan Court, which had just been rebuilt, these were timely help. Chapter 222. In the past 2 days, the wandering Bishuan Court disciples came back one after another. What was gratifying was that most of the foundation building cultivators were still alive. But there were more troublesome matters ahead. First of all, many foundation building cultivators objected to Bishuan Court's decision to no longer accept only female disciples. This tradition had been going on for several thousand years, so they were already used to it. Although Wei Haolan was quite famous, she was still a foundation building cultivator. There weren't many foundation building male cultivators in the group, and after the disaster, there were even fewer, so they didn't have much confidence in their words. Nevertheless, after this disaster, Wei Haolan's temperament was much stronger than it was 20 years ago. She forcefully suppressed all the opposing voices and expressed that this was the two elders' idea. In addition, there were also some people who were angry because the 6 of them hid in the Tao Achieving Pagoda and abandoned everyone else. However, the 2 elders were the ones who made this decision, so they didn't dare to disrespect them, so they made things difficult for Wei Haolan. Tiange made 2 moves, which made these people realize that although the core formation elders were gone, the new elders weren't to be trifled with. In the end, these people were finally convinced. 2 days later, Bishuan Court's reconstruction ceremony was held as scheduled. Early in the morning, Bishuan Court's gate was opened, and non-sect disciples poured in. After these individual cultivators were tested on their spiritual roots and cultivation levels, those who were allowed to join the group went to the square and lined up. Bishuan court didn't have strict requirements for disciples. Even those with 5 spiritual roots could join as long as they weren't too weak and could only stay in the first or second layer of the aura refining realm their whole lives. Soon, the total number of Bishuan court disciples exceeded 1,000, including the original disciples who returned. In the past 20 years, Ren Yufeng established the Divine Dragon sect. If there was anyone who didn't obey him, he would kill them to cultivate his dead aura. The cultivators in Linhai either died or fled, so there weren't many of them left. Being able to accept so many disciples was already very good. This was also the 2 elders' intention. First, Bishuan court suffered heavy casualties, and there were only a few cultivators in Linhai. If they weren't willing to open their gate, Bishuan court would weaken little by little until it couldn't be saved. Secondly, although Shengguan Yunhao's matter was caused by his own bad intentions, Bishuan court's rules weren't without its drawbacks. If male cultivators could also obtain the same status as female cultivators, there would be a lot fewer inducements for male cultivators. After taking everything into consideration, it was inevitable that Bishuan court would change the way they managed their group. If they remained stagnant, they'd only walk step by step towards death. From now on, Bishuan court's transporting formation would be open to the public. As long as one could afford the transportation fee, everyone could use the transporting formation. In addition, the disciples of the sect had to go out and travel before they advanced to the next stage to increase their knowledge. These were all things the 2 elders explained to them one by one before they left the pagoda. These past few years, Wei Haolan and Mo Tiange had a lot of exchanges, so she learned a lot about Kunwu Cultivation Group's management methods. She already had a feeling about them, so she agreed to them one by one. As for the problem of brain drain, it was unnecessary to worry about it. Linhai lacked resources, and Kunwu also didn't lack impoverished areas. However, although there weren't any big cultivation groups in those impoverished areas, there were still small and medium-sized cultivation groups, so they could still survive. Besides, the terrain of the Eastern Sea was special, so it was very difficult to obtain some beast cores and materials from the sea in Kunwu. If things went well, it might be a new source of income. In short, after experiencing the crisis of extermination, the 2 elders had already gotten over it. Wei Haolan also got over it. Bishuan court would only be finished if they didn't communicate with the outside world. Mo Tiange sighed inwardly. In fact, Mo Yaoqing's original intention in establishing a cultivation group for female cultivators was good. However, as time went by, things often changed, so the people in power had to constantly adjust. Brilliant people in power had to understand the principle that things changed with the passage of time. Bishuan court's set of rules had been in place for several thousand years, so it was time to change them. At noon, all the cultivators finished their tests. A new batch of disciples lined up in the square, waiting for the sect head's instructions. The eliminated cultivators, however, were reluctant to leave because they wanted to witness Bishuan court's rarely seen event. Wei Haolan and the other foundation-building cultivators were all very cautious today. Their clothes were luxurious and their makeup was exquisite. Even Mo Tiange changed out of her Daoist robe and put on Bishuan court's uniform to match the occasion. In any case, her identity today was Bishuan court's guest elder, so she had to show her sincerity. They first paid their respects to the group's founder, then cremated the 2 elders' corpses and enshrined them in the ancestral temple. Moreover, their memorial tablets were placed on the same level as the only elder who advanced to the nascent soul realm aside from the founder, indicating that the 2 elders' contributions to Bishuan court were no less than those of nascent soul cultivators. After the mourning was over, Wei Haolan announced a series of decisions. Disciples, Bishuan court will be rebuilt today. From now on, male and female cultivators will be treated equally, there will no longer be any difference. New disciples will be divided into official disciples and part-time disciples. Part-time disciples who pass the test can become official disciples. Every 10 years, a group competition will be held. The winners will receive foundation building pills, which will no longer be decided by the elders of the group. Then there was the issue of treatment. During this great calamity, Bishwan Court suffered disastrous losses. None of our core formation elders survived. Before Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao passed away, they invited fellow Daoist Yi Xiaotian to become Bishwan Court's guest elder. From now on, every disciple of our group must respect her as if she were a core formation elder. At this point, Wei Haolan looked towards Mo Tiange. Mo Tiange took a few steps forward, then cupped her hand slightly, performing a half salute. Seeing as Mo Tiange didn't want to speak, Wei Haolan spoke again. Elder Ye's cultivation level is outstanding and she's very capable. She can be considered the #1 cultivator below the core formation realm. With her here, presumably, Bishwan Court can develop with peace of mind. As she said that, Wei Haolan's gaze swept over several restless foundation building cultivators as a warning. Although Mo Tiange felt Wei Haolan's words were a bit exaggerated, she still calmly accepted it. In Bishwan Court, she indeed didn't fear any cultivators. Wei Haolan only said that to warn the restless disciples. Because all the core formation elders in our group have passed away, we've decided to choose 2 temporary elders among the foundation building cultivators to take on the responsibilities of elders until a new core formation elder appears. Upon hearing what she said, more than 10 foundation building cultivators all raised their heads and stared at her. They'd long heard about this matter. As elders, they had a lot more offerings compared to ordinary cultivators, so every single one of them wanted to be an elder, but they didn't know how to choose one. Wei Haolan's gaze was calm. She didn't immediately say, "Junior martial brothers and sisters, we'll discuss this matter in detail later." Soon after, she said some words of encouragement to the disciples before announcing the end of the ceremony. But the end of the ceremony was only the beginning of the bustling process. With so many new disciples, Immortal's caves had to be arranged. Most of Bishwan Court's original disciples were female cultivators, so they also had to be rearranged and separated from the male cultivators. Wei Haolan's feet didn't touch the ground during such a bustling process. Mo Tiange couldn't help with these matters, and she also didn't like it, so she returned to the residence arranged for her to rest. She couldn't go to the Dao Achieving Pagoda for the time being. Although she even went to the most secretive 7th floor, that was, after all, an expedient move. She was only a guest elder and wasn't a real member of Bishwan Court, so there were still some matters she needed to avoid. Now that there were no core formation elders in the group, Wei Haolan also discussed with her about how to handle the Dao Achieving Pagoda. Bishwan Court had suffered disastrous losses. Aside from recruiting new disciples, the most important thing right now was to cultivate core formation cultivators again. Only with core formation cultivators would the group have some confidence. Wei Haolan's idea was to take advantage of the opportunity of selecting temporary elders to choose 5 foundation building cultivators to live in the Dao Achieving Pagoda. She would then assign the 2nd to 6th floors to them and help them form their gold cores with all their might. The Dao Achieving Pagoda was full of spiritual aura. Not all of them could form their gold cores, but it was very possible for 1 or 2 of them to form their gold cores. Mo Tiange approved of this idea. However, this didn't have much to do with her. As long as Bishwan Court was on the right track, she could leave Linhai and return to Kunwu. She never expected that an ordinary experiential learning would take more than 20 years. She also didn't know how her acquaintances at Xianqing School were doing. Did they miss her and worry about her? Oh, right. Before she left, Master asked for a drop of her blood essence, so he should know she was fine. However, she hadn't returned yet. Did he come out to look for her? She was about to leave, but she couldn't calm down. She'd waited for 20 years, but at the last moment, she couldn't sit still anymore. She wished she could give up everything and fly back to Xianqing school. Just as she was lost in her thoughts, a voice came from the door. Senior Yi, are you there? Mo Tiange frowned slightly. This voice. Right, it was Yi Lu's voice. She opened the formation and the door. Sure enough, she saw the two sisters standing outside. Senior Yi, it's really you, the two sisters called out in surprise. Mo Tiange was also quite surprised and happy. She didn't expect they'd come back safe and sound. It's you. Quickly come in and sit. Yi Lu and Yi Qiu beamed with joy and nodded hurriedly. Upon entering the room, the two of them looked around then said, Senior, why is the room so messy? Should we tidy it up? Mo Tiange couldn't help but laugh. We haven't seen each other for 20 years, yet you want to tidy up the room as soon as you see me. You're really fated to be maids. Your cultivation levels aren't bad, so you should be official disciples now, right? You don't have to help me with these things. Yi Qiu was a bit embarrassed. We're used to it, Yi Lu smiled. Senior, you're an elder of Bishuan Court now. Even if we're official disciples, we should still do some things for you. Right. Yi Qiu promptly stood up. Senior, please take a seat. We'll talk to you while we tidy up. All right. Since they were so enthusiastic, she couldn't keep refusing them. Right, back then, did you escape? Were you injured? The two sisters were silent for a while before Yi Lu sighed and said, Back then, we were guarding the concocting room, so we were watching it from the beginning. Fortunately, Yi Qiu and I didn't die, we were just seriously injured. Later, when the school was in chaos, us seriously injured disciples took advantage of our familiarity with the terrain to escape. Yi Qiu continued, Elder sister and I didn't dare to return to the school, so we hid on a small island in the sea. That island didn't have any spirit veins, so no cultivators came to it. It was very safe. Fortunately, we exchanged a lot of medicinal pills with Senior, so we hid on that island all these years to heal our injuries. You hid like that for 20 years. Yi Lu smiled bitterly. We also came back once. At that time, the whole of Linhai was in chaos. Whether it was our group's disciples or individual cultivators, if they ran into that devil, they would most likely be tortured. During that time, all the cultivators in Linhai went into hiding. It was very difficult to see a single cultivator in Linhai town, yes. Aside from some shameless cultivators who relied on that devil, we cultivators living in exile were unprecedentedly united. We kept each other informed so we could survive. This could also be considered a blessing in misfortune. Really? Mo Tiange was a bit surprised. She originally thought those individual cultivators would dislike Bishuan Court cultivators because they attracted such a disaster. That's right. Yi Qiu smiled and said, in fact, our Bishuan Court's reputation among individual cultivators wasn't very good before. However, in the past 20 years, because we had a common enemy and were in the same situation, we became a lot closer. This time, the sect head announced that he would abolish the school rules and treat male cultivators equally, so they were very happy. Now, our Bishuan Court's reputation has risen greatly, presumably, will rise again very soon. Chapter 223. Mo Tiange stayed in Bishuan Court for about a month. The matter of rebuilding the group progressed very smoothly. As Yi Lu and Yi Qiu said, Ren Yufeng's matter gave Bishuan Court a chance to be reborn. When she arrived in Linhai, Bishuan Court was on the decline. There were few people with spiritual roots, and even fewer people with high aptitudes. In addition, they only accepted female cultivators, so male cultivators had to pay a huge price to become official disciples of Bishuan Court. The unfair environment created fierce conflicts. Although Bishuan Court didn't bully others for no reason, as the only cultivation group in Linhai, it was inevitably overbearing. This kind of overbearingness was whitewashed under the surface of peace, but in fact, undercurrents were turbulent. Once there was a breakthrough, it would lead to a disaster. But no one expected Bishuan Court to suffer such a disaster. Its most outstanding disciple, who was also most likely to advance to the core formation realm, rebelled. 3 core formation elders all died, and the group was almost exterminated. The individual cultivators in Linhai were also unlucky. They also lived in fear, so they resolved their conflicts and stood together. In addition, after Bishuan Court was rebuilt, Wei Haolan announced the abolition of the group rule of only accepting female cultivators, which further promoted the change of Bishuan Court's image. From now on, Bishuan Court wasn't just a cultivation group for female cultivators, it was also a cultivation group in Linhai. As for the group itself, 2 temporary elders had been decided, and one of them was Tang Xin. This guy cultivated diligently for 20 years and made rapid progress. Coupled with the fact that there were no more talented people, he unexpectedly became the #1 expert in Bishuan Court. The weak young master who had a handsome face and was hostile to all male cultivators in the past was actually reborn. It was really surprising. This was also good for Mo Tiange. Now that Tang Xin had grown up, Wei Haolan wouldn't be alone and helpless, so she could leave sooner. Thus, Mo Tiange bid farewell to Wei Haolan. Wei Haolan actually wanted to ask her to stay, but seeing that Mo Tiange was determined to leave and that she indeed stayed in Linhai for too long, she didn't say much. In the end, they went through trials and tribulations together, and now they were comrades in the same boat, so before leaving, Wei Haolan personally came to see her off. Elder Yi, these are the offerings for the elders in the group. After you leave, we might not see each other for several decades, so I'll give them to you this time. Seeing Wei Haolan's sincere smile, Mo Tiange took the Qinquan bag and touched it. This amount was at least tens of thousands of spirit stones. For the cultivators of Linhai, it was a huge sum of money. Sect leader, the sect has just been rebuilt, and spirit stones are of great use. 10,000 spirit stones is not a small amount. Is it okay to give it to me? Wei Haolan smiled and said, if it was a few days ago, I might have been reluctant. But now, it doesn't matter. Oh. Mo Tiange was puzzled. Why is that? Wei Haolan deliberately didn't say it. Why don't you guess? Mo Tiange pondered for a moment. Could it be that you found some kind of treasure? That's right. Wei Haolan said with a smile, a few days ago, a disciple of the sect came to report that a spirit stone mine was discovered in the sea. It's not far from the sea, and there aren't any high-level demonic beasts. It's completely possible to excavate it. Really? Mo Tiange was pleasantly surprised. This was really timely assistance. Congratulations, congratulations. Same to you, Wei Haolan said with a smile. Indeed, one who survives a great disaster is bound to have good fortune later on. Our Bishuan Court didn't collapse during this calamity. Now, we're experiencing one happy event after another. That being the case, I can leave with peace of mind. Wei Haolan seemed a bit reluctant to part with Mo Tiange. Elder Yi, I'm really a bit reluctant to see you leave. Mo Tiange smiled and said, whether you're willing or not, we'll meet again eventually. So you'll come back. Since I accepted the position of guest elder, I'll naturally come back to visit if I have time. Wei Haolan nodded then sighed. I know cultivators shouldn't be so persistent. Elder Yi is so magnanimous, so I'm sure you'll succeed in forming your gold core. Mo Tiange pursed her lips into a smile. Whether I succeed or not depends on the will of the heavens. She paused for a moment then said, when I return this time, I'll directly enter closed-door meditation until I form my gold core. I think even if we can meet again, it'll probably be several decades later. She was now in the late stage of the foundation building realm, and it would take her at least 10 or 20 years to reach the peak stage of the foundation building realm. If she failed to form her gold core a few more times. Although her aptitude wasn't the same as before, things like realm breakthroughs weren't foolproof. Wei Haolan asked, "Then what should we do if we want to find you? Can we go to Xianqing school?" Mo Tiange thought for a moment, then took out a jade talisman from inside her robe. This is a 10,000-mile sound-transmitting talisman. I sealed a strand of my divine sense inside it. If you need me for something urgent, just crush it. I'll immediately sense it and I'll rush over as fast as I can. She thought for a moment, then said, "If you want to find me, just go to Xianqing school and ask to see me. I'm a disciple of Lord Daoist Jinghe of Clear Spring Peak. My name is Mo Tiange." Wei Haolan took the sound-transmitting talisman and thought for a moment. "Elder Yi, you said you were a disciple of Lord Daoist Xianin. I didn't remember wrong, right?" Mo Tiange had no choice but to apologize. "I'm sorry, I didn't tell you the truth. In fact, my master is Lord Daoist Jinghe, and Lord Daoist Xianin is my master's first disciple. Before I built my foundation, I was always taught by this senior martial brother of mine." "I see." Wei Haolan sighed. "Your senior martial brother is also a nascent soul cultivator. It seems your master is quite amazing." "My master is very good." When she thought of Lord Daoist Jinghe, a faint smile appeared on her face. It had been more than 20 years since they last met. She really missed that unreliable master of hers. Although he was always disrespectful, always did some ridiculous things, had an eccentric temper, and was as fickle as a child, he always treated her sincerely. The two of them chatted for a while before they finally went to the transporting formation. Wei Haolan led Mo Tiange through many twists and turns before they finally arrived at an inconspicuous small building. This small building was obviously dilapidated, but there were intact formations outside. Wei Haolan spent some effort to open these restrictions. Mo Tiange was amazed. "Sect head, is the transporting formation here?" She heard the transporting formation leading to the outside was very mysterious. In the past 20 years, Ren Yufeng also wanted to use this formation to go to the outside world, but he never found it. It was actually in this ordinary small building. Wei Haolan smiled and said, "You didn't expect this, did you?" "In fact, we didn't go this way. There's a tunnel leading to this place in the main hall of the conference hall. If there are disciples going out, they'll use that tunnel. We only send a group of disciples out every few years, and they're all our trusted disciples, so the secret is well protected." Mo Tiange nodded. She looked around, but in her heart, she recalled Yan Ruoshu and the others she met in Ziwei's Immortal's cave. When she first met them, she never expected she would have this kind of entanglement with Bishuan Court. She also never expected she would become Bishuan Court's guest elder. It just so happened that Bishuan Court went through a catastrophe in the past 20 years. Too many disciples went missing, so no one asked about their whereabouts. However, she didn't need to worry about this matter. In any case, the deaths of Yan Ruoshu and the others had nothing to do with her. Sect head, Elder Yi. After entering the small building, they followed the stone steps to the underground. The disciple guarding the tunnel bowed to them. Wei Haolan nodded, then led Mo Tiange to the innermost room. This was an extremely complicated star atlas formation. There were specks of light on it, which coincided with some kind of astrology. Upon closer inspection, there were some special differences. Upon seeing Mo Tiange's gaze, Wei Haolan said, "Demonic Mountain has strange restrictions, so ordinary transporting formations can't send people there." I heard from the elders that this transporting formation is a kind of ancient transporting formation. I don't know where the patriarch found it. So that's how it is. Mo Yaoqing's attainments in formations were indeed quite outstanding. Unfortunately, there weren't many records in her notebook. Elder Yi. Wei Haolan didn't immediately send Mo Tiange into the transporting formation. She frowned slightly, but in the end, she couldn't help but laugh. Even if you escort a gentleman for 1,000 miles, you'll have to part in the end. I'm being naggy again. Mo Tiange also laughed. After getting along with Wei Haolan for 20 years, Mo Tiange really liked her temperament. She was decisive, valued benefits, liked to weigh the pros and cons, and was ruthless, but she was also heroic and straightforward. No one was perfect. Among cultivators, it was really not easy to meet such a woman. Wei Haolan pondered for a while, then said, "In these 2 years, how about I hide your whereabouts and just say you're in closed-door meditation?" Although Junior Marshal Brother Tang's not bad now, he's still a bit too inexperienced. Mo Tiange nodded subconsciously, but when she regained her composure, she smiled and said, "Sect head, why do your words sound so awkward to me? Junior Marshal Brother Tang's a bit older than me. Age doesn't matter in cultivation." Wei Haolan smiled. "Although you're young, you're very mature. This is something Junior Marshal Brother Tang can never catch up to." What she said made Mo Tiange want to reflect on herself. "Although I'm young, I'm very mature." What she said. Doesn't that mean my mentality is much older than my actual age? Oh. To women, this kind of saying always made them feel like they were aging prematurely. Although, as a cultivator, it's better to be a bit mature. When Mo Tiange finally finished speaking, she stepped into the transporting formation. Wei Haolan personally laid down spirit stones. Then, "I'll take my leave first." Wei Haolan smiled. "We'll meet again, Elder Yi." "Oh, no, I prefer to call you fellow Daoist Yi." Mo Tiange cupped her hands. The transporting formation shone brightly. At the last moment, Mo Tiange suddenly remembered something. She hurriedly took something out of her Qianquan bag and threw it out. "Sect head, this is." Before she could finish speaking, she already disappeared into the transporting formation. Wei Haolan was flabbergasted. She picked up the small box on the ground and opened it. Inside were rows of neatly arranged jade bottles. She took out a jade bottle and pulled out the cork. A pleasantly surprised expression flitted across her face. She hastily opened the second jade bottle, then the third. The pleasantly surprised expression on her face became more and more intense. In the end, Wei Haolan hugged the box tightly. She stared at the now empty transporting formation and said, "Elder Yi, thank you." The first bottle contained foundation building pills. The second bottle contained soul strengthening pills. The third bottle was the same. These medicinal pills were enough to cultivate a group of foundation building cultivators. They could even support a foundation building cultivator all the way to the peak stage of the foundation building realm. In the end, this Elder Yi didn't accept Bishuan Court's offerings for nothing. When the light from the transporting formation dissipated, Mo Tiange was already standing on Kunwa's land. She softly sniffed the rich spiritual aura in the air, then looked at the stretch of high mountains in the distance. "Kunwa, it's indeed Kunwa. I'm finally back." Before she could calm her excitement, a ray of light appeared in the distant sky. This ray of light was getting closer and closer, brighter and brighter. It was actually a glowing feather. Mo Tiange reached out her hand. The feather fell into her palm and turned into a talisman. This was Xianqing School's summoning talisman. Chapter 224. School summoning talismans were mainly divided into 2 types. One was the disciple's summoning talisman, which was used to communicate with fellow disciples. Once this talisman was sent out, all the disciples within a certain range would receive it. Disciples who were away from home could receive several before leaving the mountain. The other type was the master's summoning talisman. Once this talisman was sent out, as long as one had a Enchanting school identity tablet, they could receive it no matter where they were in the celestial pole. However, this talisman was very difficult to make, and it required a lot of people, so generally speaking, it wouldn't be used casually. The first talisman Tiange received was the Master Summoning Talisman. It had been 22 years since she left Mount Taikong, but as soon as she set foot on Kunwa's land, she actually received the Master Summoning Talisman. Tiange frowned slightly and unfolded the talisman. Xianqing school disciples, listen to my order. All disciples in the foundation building realm and above, regardless of whether they have errands or not, are to put down whatever they're doing and return to Mount Taikong before the 6th day of the 6th month. There was only such a simple command and no reason was mentioned at all, causing Tiange to be dumbfounded. Xianqing school had more than 200 foundation building disciples in total. Although many of them died in the demonic beast riots several decades ago, it had been more than 30 years, so they should have almost recovered. In addition to the foundation building disciples who managed the shops and were ordered to run errands outside, there must be about 300 disciples in total. Why did they summon so many disciples back to the mountain? Moreover, many of Xianqing school's important industries were managed by foundation building cultivators outside. If they were all summoned back, a lot of things would come to a standstill. Was this matter that serious? Tiange shook her head and flicked her fingers, igniting the talisman in her hand. A spiritual light was emitted from the burnt talisman and flew towards the sky. This was the reply from the Master Summoning Talisman. At the same time, a similar spiritual light streaked across the sky. Tiange smiled when she saw it. Seems like a fellow disciple is also here. That's good. She soared up and flew towards the place where the spiritual light came from. Before long, her divine sense sensed someone flying towards her. As soon as their divine senses came into contact, they quickly flew towards each other. The person was indeed a Xianqing school disciple. When he saw her from afar, he saluted. Senior Martial Sister. It was a young man in the early stage of the foundation building realm. Although he called her Senior Martial Sister, his expression and tone were a bit arrogant. Looking at this person's appearance, he was no more than 17 or 18 years old, so he must be very young. A young talent would always be a little arrogant, but this was nothing. With a faint smile on her face, Tiange also raised her hand to return his salute. Junior Martial Brother, greetings. The two met in the air and stood still, sizing each other up. The young man realized that she was still a young girl, but he didn't take it to heart. Among the female cultivators of the large sects, there were many who cultivated youth-retaining techniques. Even if they couldn't maintain their youthful looks, they could still afford to buy look-preserving pills. This senior sister has also received a message from the sect and is returning to the sect. The young man asked. Of Mo. The youth smiled and said, in that case, how about we travel together? Mo fellow, Mo Su's sect, Mo and Mo Master Su. Mo. As they set off on their journey back, the young man introduced himself. My surname is Lan, and my name is a single character, Ling. I'm a disciple of Sweet Dew Peak. May I know senior's name? Lan Ling. The corners of Tiange's mouth couldn't help but curve upwards. With such a girly name, it was no wonder he had to emphasize that it was the Ling from Chuling. My name is Tiange, a disciple of Clear Spring Peak. Oh, so it's senior sister from Clear Spring Peak. The young man tilted his head and looked at her again. Senior Martial Sister, are you here to travel or to handle some matters? Traveling. Mo Tiange gave him a simple explanation then asked, Junior Marshal Brother Lan, what's this place? Ha! Astonishment flashed in Lan Ling's eyes. Senior Marshal Sister Mo is here, but you actually don't know where this place is? Mo Tiange shook her head softly. I came here through a transporting formation, but I haven't had time to ask around. Oh, I see, Lan Ling said, this is the southeast of Kunwu, not far from Tiandao sect. Upon hearing this answer, Mo Tiange was dumbfounded. So it's here. What's going on here? Lan Ling was curious. Wasn't this place near Yunwu sect? However, she didn't have the time nor was she in the mood to return to Yunwu sect, so she only said faintly, I've been here before. Oh. Lan Ling nodded then didn't say anything else. He could see that Mo Tiange wasn't a talkative person, and he himself was quite arrogant. Even if she was a senior martial sister in the late stage of the foundation building realm, he still disdained flattering her. Mo Tiange was happy to see this, so the two of them focused on hurrying on their journey. They were now in the southeast of Kunwu, and Xianqing School happened to be in the west of Kunwu. On their way back, they met some fellow disciples one after another. 2 became 3, 3 became 4, and finally, the number of people traveling with them reached 8. There were so many people, and among them, there were some who liked to talk, so they started to chatter all the way. Mo Tiange hadn't been back for more than 20 years, so she didn't know so many things happened in the school, so she listened with great interest. For example, Grandmaster Xinyang and Grandmaster Lingxiu wanted to betroth their favorite disciples, Martial Uncle Bai and Martial Uncle Jiang. However, when Martial Uncle Bai found out about this, he disliked Martial Uncle Jiang for being unruly and refused to agree. When Martial Uncle Jiang heard about this, the whole world was turned upside down. The Martial Uncle Bai and Martial Uncle Jiang they were talking about should be Junior Martial Sister Jiang, the disciple of Bai Yanfei and Lord Daoist Lingxiu. Mo Tiange had heard about Junior Martial Sister Jiang before. She was Martial Uncle Lingxiu's blood-related descendant and was doted on since she was a child, so she was unruly and willful. In Drifting Cloud Peak, she was like a little overlord. Even in other peaks, no one dared to say anything about her. Someone asked, this Martial Uncle Jiang is still young. Our Xianqing school doesn't focus on lust between men and women. Even for dual cultivation, we usually only consider it after we reach the core formation realm, right? Why do you want to betroth them now? The person who spoke was an old man. Although this old man was quite old and his hair was already white, he was very talkative. Mo Tiange didn't know where he heard this rumor, but these days, he was always gossiping with others. Now, he said with a smile, Junior Martial Brother, don't forget how old Grandmaster Lingxiu is. He's about to pass away. Mo Tiange nodded secretly when she heard what he said. That's right. This Grandmaster Lingxiu's lifespan is almost up, so he's anxious to find a backer for his beloved descendant, right? Unfortunately, Junior Martial Sister Jiang is too unruly. I'm afraid she'll let him down. Oh, so that's how it is. The previous person understood. Grandmaster Lingxiu looks very spirited, but he's actually about to pass away. The old man stroked his beard and narrowed his eyes. In any case, Grandmaster Lingxiu is a nascent soul cultivator. As long as he doesn't pass away, his cultivation level is solid. Unfortunately, once Grandmaster Lingxiu passes away, the number of nascent soul cultivators in our Xianqing school will be reduced to 5 again. Someone else interrupted. What's wrong with that? Several of our martial uncles are already in the late stage of the core formation realm. They'll soon be able to advance to the nascent soul realm, right? As he spoke, he counted with his fingers. Martial Uncle Danning of Drifting Cloud Peak, Martial Uncle Yuanin of Soul's Retreat Peak, Martial Uncle Shoujing of Clear Spring Peak, and martial uncle Lingxi of Sweet Du Peak. These martial uncles are all in the late stage of the core formation realm. Ha! The old man raised his head and laughed. You guys, how long ago was this news? Let me tell you, Martial Uncle Danning and Martial Uncle Shoujing are already in the peak stage of the core formation realm. They'll be forming their nascent souls soon. Ah! Upon hearing what he said, several people in the same group looked towards the old man. Even Lan Ling, who disdained to talk to him, and Mo Tiange, who had been quietly listening, also cast their gazes on him. Cultivators forming their nascent souls was a major event for cultivation groups. Not to mention small and medium-sized cultivation groups, even large cultivation groups like theirs would strengthen their vigilance and activate the Great Mountain Protecting Formation once a cultivator was ready to form his or her nascent soul. They would be in a half-sealed state to prevent people from causing trouble. Having so many people paying attention to him all of a sudden, the old man's gossipy heart was satisfied. You guys don't know. An impatient person urged, we've either been traveling outside for several years or we're usually so busy that we don't even know. Senior Martial Brother Yen, quickly tell us. The old man was very proud of himself. Alright, I'll tell you. Based on our current situation at Xianqing School, Grandmaster Lingshu's lifespan is said to only have about 10 years left, so he's in a hurry to marry Martial Uncle Jiang to a young junior like Martial Uncle Bai who has a backer and a bright future. That way, even if he passes away, he won't have to worry about Martial Uncle Jiang causing any trouble. Senior Martial Brother Yen, get to the point, someone urged impatiently. Although Martial Uncle Jiang's matter also sounded very interesting, it was nothing compared to someone forming their nascent soul in the school. Young people are really impatient. The old man glared at that person, then continued to speak neither too fast nor too slow. A nascent soul cultivator passing away has a profound impact on the school, especially after Grandmaster Xianyin formed his nascent soul, which greatly improved Xianqing School's strength. At this time, our Grandmasters naturally don't want to just watch Grandmaster Lingshu pass away. But how can they stop something like passing away? Longevity pills aren't that easy to obtain. This old man was really long-winded. Listening to him, Mo Tiange really wanted to grab his collar and shake him hard to shake off all his nonsense. She definitely wasn't the only one with this idea, but this old man wasn't threatened at all. In the end, they were from the same school, and they couldn't do such a thing, so she had no choice but to let him continue to be noisy. After a long time, he finally got to the actual content. Since that's the case, there's no other way. Grandmaster Lingshu can't hold on for more than a few years, so we can only let the core formation martial uncles who have hopes of forming their nascent souls speed up their cultivation. In addition to Martial Uncle Danning, Martial Uncle Shoujing, Martial Uncle Yuanyin, and Martial Uncle Lingxi only advanced to the late stage in the last 50 years. This is all because of the support of nascent soul grandmasters. Then, he talked about several hundred words of nonsense before he got to the main point. It hasn't been long since Martial Uncle Yuanyin and Martial Uncle Lingxi advanced to the late stage, and it'll be a while before they can form their nascent souls. Martial Uncle Danning stayed in the late stage for 100 years and finally reached the peak stage of the core formation realm 2 years ago. As for Martial Uncle Shoujing, he just reached the peak stage of the core formation realm not long ago. Martial Uncle Shoujing had been in seclusion for 35 years. Ever since he returned from the demonic beast riot 35 years ago, he had been in seclusion. Martial Uncle Shoujing's talent really can't be underestimated. Among the few of us, I'm afraid there are some people with better spiritual roots than him, but we're still struggling in the foundation establishment realm. Not only has he formed his gold core, he's going to form his nascent soul very soon. Senior Brother Yen. Someone couldn't help but say, we all know about Martial Uncle Shoujing. There's no need to keep talking about it, right? The other 7 people all had the same expression, so Senior Marshal Brother Yen could only shut his mouth. Fine. In any case, you know Marshal Uncle Shoujing and Marshal Uncle Danning are already in the peak stage of the core formation realm and can form their nascent souls. That's it. The 7 of them were speechless. Under the gazes of the 7 people, the old man surnamed Yen cried out in grievance, "You wanted it to be concise, so that's it." After a moment of silence, someone else asked, "Can Marshal Uncle Danning and Marshal Uncle Shoujing successfully form their nascent souls?" "Who knows?" Senior Marshal Brother Yen quickly chimed in, "Forming the nascent soul. It's not like building one's foundation. As long as one's aptitude isn't too bad, one can always take foundation building pills and eventually succeed. Forming one's nascent soul can only depend on the will of the heavens. It doesn't have much to do with aptitude." That was true. Building one's foundation was the first threshold of cultivation. Although most cultivators stayed in the aura refining realm their whole lives, for disciples of cultivation groups like them, as long as they were a bit serious and had a bit of luck, the possibility of them building their foundation was still quite high. But when it came to forming one's nascent soul, there were too many examples that proved the will of the heavens was unpredictable. Chapter 225. When Mo Tiange mentioned nascent soul, several foundation-building cultivators chatted all the way back to Mount Taikang. Even their initial fear of the school's mishap had faded. In fact, aside from encountering fellow disciples, there was nothing unusual along the way. If something happened to Xianqing School, the whole of Kunwu wouldn't be so peaceful. Mo Tiange heard a lot of news on the way. Now, at least she knew her master was safe and her senior martial brother Shoujing was going to advance to the nascent soul realm soon. Thinking of this, she remained silent, unable to describe her feelings. She was about to form her gold core, but he was about to form his nascent soul. The distance was always so far, nevertheless, she would never be impatient for this matter. After so many years, she firmly remembered her master's teachings. She was now a genius, so she didn't have to worry about failing to advance to the next realm because of her lifespan. Martial Uncle Xianin, even if he was extremely talented, he just needed to walk steadily step by step. Melancholy flashed across her heart, but she quickly controlled it. Compared to the great Tao of immortality, a slight change in her heart was really nothing. Besides, that kind of acquaintance would always leave a knot in her heart. That being the case, why should she insist on something that was originally imperfect? After traveling day and night, they finally arrived at Mount Taikang after a month. Under their feet was a majestic mountain range, a sea of clouds, spiritual aura, and immortal aura. The main peak was thousands of feet high, surrounded by 6 slightly shorter peaks that looked like a blooming lotus. Countless roof tiles and eaves were hidden in the forest, and disciples in white and blue robes came and went. After leaving for more than 20 years, she finally came back. Mo Tiange looked at everything under her feet with nostalgia. Crossing tens of thousands of miles from the eastern territory of Kunwu reminded her of when she hadn't built her foundation yet. It took her no less than 2 months to travel from Yunwu sect to Xianqing School. That person looked cold but was very considerate. He knew her cultivation level was too low and she couldn't stand traveling day and night, so, senior martial brothers and sisters. The patrolling cultivators came and saluted them. "You must be tired from the journey. Please go back to your caves and rest." Among them, the old man surnamed Yen was very gossipy. He hurriedly pulled the leading foundation building cultivator and asked, "Senior martial brother, may I ask why the school called us back?" The leading cultivator shook his head and said, "The Grand Masters of the various peaks will explain this to you in detail, it's not my place to comment. Sorry, everyone, please go back first." The other party's refusal was so obvious that the old man had no choice but to follow the crowd into the protective mountain formation and return to their respective peaks. Mo Tiange stopped in midair for a moment. She raised her head to look at the semi-defensive Great Mountain protecting formation, then lowered her head to look at Mount Taikang, which didn't seem to have changed at all from more than 20 years ago. While descending towards Clear Spring Peak, she pondered in her heart that this was indeed what Old Man Yen said: someone was about to attempt to form their nascent soul. However, even if there were cultivators in the school who were trying to form their nascent souls, they wouldn't summon all the foundation-building cultivators back. When Martial Uncle Xianin formed his nascent soul back then, the school was only slightly more heavily guarded. Since she couldn't think of a reason, she shook her head and threw these thoughts to the back of her mind. In any case, she was already back. Wouldn't she just have to ask? Her uncouth master was the Grand Master of Clear Spring Peak. Even if other people didn't know the inside story, she would know. While he was lost in his thoughts, he had already landed. She raised her head to look around. The scenery and buildings around her hadn't changed at all. It was just that the cultivators coming and going didn't recognize her. Back then, she was tossed around by her master and spent several months in Mingxue Hall. She also often went to the main peak to give sermons, so most of the aura-refining disciples in the school recognized her. Especially after she took over Shangqing Palace's affairs, everyone in Clear Spring Peak respectfully addressed her as Grand Master Mo or Martial Uncle Mo, but now, as she walked on Clear Spring Peak, the disciples coming and going only curiously sized her up. When they saw her passing by, they simply stood to the side to make way for her and even lowered their heads to show their respect to a foundation-building senior. Only a few older aura-refining cultivators called out Grand Master Mo in astonishment, but they attracted the astonished gazes of the younger cultivators. Mo Tiange showed a faint smile, then raised her head to look at the sky of Clear Spring Peak. It had been 22 years. The new generation had replaced the old. These young disciples who had just entered the school and were still busy on Clear Spring Peak didn't recognize her at all. As for those disciples who recognized her, if they hadn't already advanced to the foundation-building realm in the past 22 years, they probably would have also sensed the passage of time and wholeheartedly cultivated, right? For high-level cultivators, the short span of 22 years was the best time for aura-refining cultivators. This Senior Martial Sister. Just as she was about to enter Shangqing Palace, she was stopped by a disciple guarding the gate. He sized her up from head to toe, his eyes filled with doubt. Senior Martial Sister, this is Grand Master Jinghe's Immortal's cave. You can't enter without being summoned. Mo Tiange was stunned, but she couldn't help but laugh. As it turned out, it wasn't just aura-refining cultivators, even these foundation-building cultivators didn't recognize her. Her laughter made the disciple guarding the gate unhappy. He said with a straight face, Senior Martial Sister, Grand Master has a bad temper. Please leave quickly. Mo Tiange waved her hand. Just as she was about to say something, she heard someone calling out in bewilderment, Martial Uncle Mo. She turned around. It was Mingxia, who often served Lord Daoist Jinghe and was quite fond of him. Mo Tiange smiled. Mingxia, long time no see. However, Mingxia was startled by her friendly greeting. Back in Shangqing Palace, because these maids were arrogant because they relied on their grandmaster and because Qin, Qi, Shu, and Hua schemed against her, Mo Tiange always treated the 16 of them harshly. If she was angry, she would scold them. Later on, these maids all behaved themselves, but she was too lazy to pay attention to them. She rarely smiled at them. After 22 years of not seeing each other, Mingxia suddenly saw her smiling face and her voice was so gentle and pleasant. This person was really fake, right? However, Mingxia didn't know that Mo Tiange had been outside for a long time, experienced a lot, and her horizons were broadened. She naturally didn't care about these little grudges from the past. Besides, she hadn't returned for a long time. Now that she saw every blade of grass and every tree in Xianqing school, she was happy, let alone her old acquaintances. What? You don't recognize me? Mingxia examined Mo Tiange up and down before she finally confirmed her identity. A smile appeared on her face. Martial Uncle Mo, you're finally back. Grandmaster was just wondering why you didn't send a message back for more than 20 years. Mo Tiange showed a faint smile, but before she could answer, she saw the disciple guarding the door looking at her with astonishment. Martial Uncle Mo. Exactly, Mingxia said to the disciple, this is our Grandmaster's last disciple, Martial Uncle Mo. Martial Uncle Mo hasn't returned for more than 20 years, but you actually stopped her outside? The disciple scratched his head. Although he was embarrassed, he didn't panic. Instead, he respectfully saluted her. Martial Uncle Mo, please forgive me. I've never seen you before, so I didn't recognize you. Please don't blame me. This disciple's words were appropriate. Besides, Mo Tiange wasn't angry, so she naturally wouldn't argue with him. She smiled and said, it's nothing. Can I go in now? The disciple promptly nodded and stepped aside. Mo Tiange dusted off her sleeves then slowly walked into Shangqing Palace, which she hadn't seen for more than 20 years. Girl, you're finally willing to come back. Her clown master was still half lying on his dragon throne. His face wasn't drooping, and there were no wrinkles on the corners of his eyes. He was still handsome, graceful, noble, and lazy. Right now, he was lazily flipping through a book and didn't even bat an eyelid. Look, even the gatekeeper doesn't recognize you. Mo Tiange couldn't help but smile at this familiar scene. She brushed her sleeves and knelt down softly. Disciple hasn't returned for more than 20 years, making Master worried. Master, please punish me. Cough, cough. Lord Daoist Jinghe swallowed the unchewed plum in his mouth along with the core. He choked so much that his eyes rolled back. Mingxia promptly ran to the front to drink the tea. Grand Master. After a long time, Lord Daoist Jinghe finally calmed down. He returned the tea to Mingxia, sat up, and glared at Mo Tiange. Damn girl, do you want to choke your master to death? She was still smiling, but her eyes widened innocently. Disciple didn't do anything. I even greeted Master politely. You. After being choked by the plum, Lord Daoist Jinghe was choked again by this sentence, so he could only glare at her angrily. But after glaring for a while, the expression on his face changed into one of joy. Oh. Not bad. Not only did you make a realm breakthrough, but your realm is also very stable. And you didn't leave for nothing these past 20 years. Come here, let Master take a look. He waved at her cheerfully. Mo Tiange stood up and walked towards him. Lord Daoist Jinghe grabbed her wrist and probed her meridians with his spiritual aura. After a while, good, that's right. He quickly examined her body, then let go of her wrist. He picked up a plum and threw it to her. You're obedient. Master rewarded this to you. Mo Tiange caught the plum, which seemed to have only a little bit of spiritual aura. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Master, as your beloved disciple, I left for more than 20 years and finally came back with great difficulty. Why didn't you ask me anything? Lord Daoist Jinghe picked up another plum and nibbled on it. He said disapprovingly, beloved disciple? Do I have such a thing? He looked her up and down with disgust. You can run and jump, and you're in a good mood after making a realm breakthrough. Do I need to ask you anything? Ask me how I've been in the past 20 years and what I've experienced. As a master, shouldn't you analyze the situation for your disciple? What kind of master was this? She hadn't been back for 20 years. Now that she finally came back from her travels, he gave her a plum as a reward. He didn't even ask her anything. Back then, when she was a nominal disciple of martial Uncle Xianin, he wasn't like this. There was no need to mention second uncle. Whenever she encountered something, second uncle would analyze the situation for her, tell her what lessons she should learn and how to deal with it next time. Lord Daoist Jinghe rolled his eyes. What kind of person am I? I can tell you're very well just by touching your meridians. As for what you've experienced, that's for you to understand yourself. What's the use of telling you? You're not a child. Mo Tiange was stunned, but she soon smiled happily. Yes, she was different now. She wasn't a little cultivator in the aura refining realm who needed someone to help her walk, and her master wasn't second uncle or martial Uncle Xianin. He had his own way of caring and teaching, so why did he need to insist on the same? All right then. Mo Tiange moved a chair and sat in front of him. Since master has nothing to say, disciple has a lot of things to ask. Chapter 226. Alas! Why did I accept you as my disciple? Lord Daoist Jinghe looked at her and shook his head with a sigh. I, Qin Jinghe, have been wise all my life, but, master. Mo Tiange glared at him. I just want to ask you something. Do you have to be like this? Alas! You're not filial. You actually talk to master like this, master. If she didn't say anything, he wouldn't stop sighing. Lord Daoist Jinghe glanced at her. Upon seeing her furious expression, he chuckled and said, Tiange master thinks this is more like you. Look at you suddenly kneeling and begging for punishment, master's heart feels creeped out. Mo Tiange said everything she wanted to say. What kind of master was this? In other words, if she wasn't fierce, this master would feel his bones were light and he would feel uncomfortable all over. Enough. She said with a straight face, Master, was everything okay when I wasn't here? What about Jinji? Has he built his foundation? Oh, it's good, it's all good. I didn't let anyone touch your little cave abode. Jinji built his foundation for years after you left. He's doing very well now. Mo Tiange felt a bit relieved when she heard Jinji had built his foundation. Although she secretly left some foundation building pills for him, Jinji's spiritual roots were poor after all, so it was hard to say whether he could build his foundation or not. 22 years had passed, so Jinji should be in his 40s now. If he still hadn't built his foundation, it would be troublesome. Some cultivators didn't fail to build their foundation only because they were old. Usually, it was because they failed for a long time that their mental state became unstable, so they gradually got further and further away from building their foundation. Master, you've been teaching him all these years, right? Ha! Teaching him. I don't have that kind of thought. Lord Daoist Jinghe waved the book in his hand indifferently. Mo Tiange wrinkled her brows. Don't tell me you want Jinji to perish on his own. Seeing that she was about to get angry, Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled flatteringly and said softly, Disciple, don't be angry. Although I didn't manage that stupid boy, I found someone to manage him. Rest assured. Found someone. That's right. Your senior brothers have nothing better to do, so I found one of them to look after your child for you. This was indeed something he would do. Back then, didn't he throw her to martial Uncle Xianin for a long time? Later, because of other matters, he had no choice but to recognize her as his disciple. With a sigh, Mo Tiange said, Master, since you don't have anything to ask, I'll go back and rest first. All right, all right. He nodded hurriedly. Have a good rest. I'll have them call you if there's anything. Oh, by the way, which senior martial brother is Jinji with? I'll go get him first. This. Lord Daoish Jinghe stared at her then said cautiously, Jinji's already 40 years old now. He's no longer the child from back then, yet you still want to adopt him. Leave him some face as a man. No matter how old he is, he's still my nephew, Mo Tiange said. Besides, in terms of age, she could indeed be Jinji's mother. Thinking up to this point, she cast a somewhat suspicious glance at him. Master, tell me the truth, what did you do to Jinji? I really didn't. Lord Daoish Jinghe said boldly and put on a serious face. I'll have someone call him back later, okay? I promise you'll see him in a while. Mo Tiange stared at her master for a long time then finally nodded. All right, I hope master isn't lying. Hee, how could I? Quickly go and rest. You look tired. Mo Tiange was persuaded by his seemingly concerned tone. I understand. She turned around and walked a few steps then turned back again. By the way, Lord Daoish Jinghe was startled. Ha! Master, do you really have to be this scared? No, I'm not scared. Lord Daoish Jinghe rubbed his nose, his gaze wandering. I said I called Jinji back. What other questions do you have? I just want to ask, what kind of major event happened when the school sent the summoning talisman this time? Upon hearing this question, Lord Daoish Jinghe calmed down. About this, major event is indeed a major event, but it's not a bad thing. It's a bit complicated, so I'll tell you later. You should go and rest first. This time, his expression was very firm. Mo Tiange thought about it. Although Master was unreliable, he never delayed official business. Since that was the case, she'd let him go. All right, Master, I'll believe you this time, but don't let me down. I know. Lord Daoish Jinghe impatiently drove her away. You've just come back, but you're already so annoying. Go and rest. Looking at him, she really didn't believe there was no conspiracy. Mo Tiange sighed inwardly then walked towards her Mingxin residence. After she left, Lord Daoish Jinghe hurriedly called, Mingxia. Here. Mingxia hurriedly ran over. Quickly go to that stinky brat's place and get Jinji back. Mo Tiange naturally didn't know what Lord Daoish Jinghe said. She walked into her small cave and found that nothing had changed. There was a pond in front of the house, a medicinal field in the back, and a row of 5 small houses. There were still only a few tables and chairs in the small living room, a tea set, and 2 books on the table, which she used to read often. In the concocting room, there was the coarse concocting furnace she bought for 15 spirit stones when she first started learning pill concocting. She had never used the tool concocting room, so it was empty and had nothing inside. In the lounge, Jinji's bed was still there, but there was nothing he usually used. Finally, there was her cultivation room. It was still the same as before, but it was clean and tidy. Apparently, someone cleaned it from time to time when she wasn't here. She naturally didn't think those maids did it out of kindness. Maybe it was Master's order or Jinji's doing it himself. Thinking up to this point, the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. She picked up an animal skin book from the bookshelf and casually flipped through it. In this place, someone was still thinking about her. Auntie, Auntie. A somewhat unfamiliar voice came from outside. Mo Tiange turned around and saw a young man in his 20s running towards her from the door of the cultivation room. He had delicate and pleasant features, and when he smiled, there were 2 small dimples on his cheeks. Auntie. He was extremely happy to see her. Mo Tiange thought he would jump up like before, but in the end, he just ran towards her with quick steps. You're finally back. The Yi Jinji in front of her was already a foundation-building cultivator. He still looked young and his temperament was still gentle, but he gave off a feeling that he was a lot more mature. She stared at him for a long time and finally said, "Jinji, you've grown up." Yijinji grabbed his hair and smiled embarrassedly. "Auntie, why did you go out for so long?" "Of course I've grown up. By the way, why haven't I heard from you for so long? Are you in danger? Are you alright?" "I was worried to death, but Grandmaster always said I was worried for nothing." Emo Tienga sat down on the praying mat. She watched as he automatically sat in front of her and chattered about what happened after they parted. She felt warm inside, as if she was under the warm sun in winter. "Auntie, why aren't you talking?" Yijinji finally noticed her silence after he finished asking a bunch of questions. Emo Tienga, who had been smiling the whole time, finally answered, "Auntie saw that you were talking very happily, so I'll let you talk to your heart's content first." "Auntie." Yijinji's expression fell. "Why are you acting like Master?" "Master?" Emo Tienga wrinkled her brows slightly. Yijinji ignored that she was actually asking him a question. He impatiently asked again, "Auntie, you haven't told me how you've been in the past 22 years. She smiled and thought for a while before answering, "I did encounter some things, but I also obtained some fated chances. In the end, it was more daunting than dangerous. I didn't contact you because I was trapped in a place for a long time, but it's all over now, so there's no danger." She casually explained, then asked, "What's the matter with the master you mentioned? Who taught you all these years?" "It's Master." Yijinji seemed to be a bit confused about her question. "Auntie, after you left, it took me several years to build my foundation. Grandmaster became impatient when he saw me building my foundation, so he sent me to Master's place." At this point, he curled his lips, obviously very dissatisfied with this Grandmaster's behavior. He then smiled and said, "Fortunately, although Master looks very fierce, he's actually very good. Although Master has been very busy these years, he's always taken care of me." Emo Tienga had a bad premonition. "Who's the Master you're talking about? Who else could it be? Don't I only have one Master?" Yijinji looked puzzled. Emo Tienga slowly furrowed her brows, remaining silent. "Auntie." Yijinji called her cautiously. "It's nothing." She slowly smiled. Even if something happened, it wasn't Jinji's fault. It was that old pervert who schemed against her. This was really strange. She avoided everything because she didn't want to have anything to do with that senior martial brother, so why did that cheap master want to scheme against her? Great! The nephew she raised as a disciple became someone else's disciple just like that. He called him master so intimately, completely unlike how he used to be. Realizing what she was thinking, Emo Tienga was dumbfounded. She then raised the corners of her mouth in a self-mocking manner. What kind of mentality was she having now? Was she jealous? Because she hadn't come back for more than 20 years, Jinji now had someone who might be as important as her, so she felt unhappy. Or was it because that person was him? She realized her thoughts were a bit bad. Apparently, as soon as she came back, some emotions that she'd controlled well started to spread involuntarily. She couldn't help but raise her head to look around. There was obviously no trace of them anymore. "Jinji," she asked slowly, "how did you get through all these years? How did your master treat you?" Seeing that she didn't look unhappy, Yijinji finally relaxed. He thought for a moment then answered slowly, "Auntie, when you sent me to Yi Clan that year, I stayed there for half a year before I came back. With Xiaohua by my side, nothing happened on the way back. After I came back, I smoothly passed the test and obtained a foundation building pill. With Grandmaster's consent, I entered closed-door meditation to build my foundation, but I didn't succeed." Upon seeing him spreading his hands, Emo Tienga was puzzled. "Didn't I give you something to take out when you built your foundation?" "Auntie, are you talking about that bottle of medicinal pills? Yijinji scratched his head then said embarrassedly, I was too excited the first time and forgot about it. Upon seeing his expression, Mo Tiange shook her head helplessly. You could forget anything, but you actually forgot such an important thing. Yijinji said, I've never built my foundation before, so I was too excited. At this point, he couldn't help but laugh. Later, when I failed to build my foundation, I found out Auntie secretly left me a foundation building pill. But everyone knew I failed to build my foundation, so it wasn't good for me to enter closed-door meditation again. Moreover, entering closed-door meditation again right after I failed wasn't good either, so I waited for another 3 years. This time, I finally succeeded. At least you're not completely stupid. Auntie. Upon seeing his embarrassed expression, Mo Tiange couldn't help but laugh. Okay, continue. Yijinji glanced at her embarrassedly then said, after I built my foundation, I ran into a lot of cultivation problems, so I went to ask Grandmaster. In the beginning, Grandmaster gave me detailed instructions, but later, Grandmaster got impatient after I asked too many questions. He said, Master's already in the late stage of the core formation realm, but he doesn't have a disciple to serve him. As his disciple, how can I be so idle? Then he threw me to Master. Then, how did your master treat you? Master was very good. When he mentioned the word master, Yijinji's expression was no longer as disdainful as it was 20 years ago. Instead, it was filled with reverence. Master doesn't like to talk much, and he doesn't like to deal with people. People who don't know him always think he's cold and arrogant, but in fact, he's not like that. When I first went to him, I didn't understand anything and was quite afraid of him. But later, I felt Master was very good. He was so busy, but he taught me cultivation patiently and never became impatient. Grandmaster said he wanted me to serve Master, but Master didn't even let me serve him tea or water. Yijinji talked non-stop for a long time, but Mo Tiange didn't say a single word until the end. Auntie, are you unhappy? After a long time, Mo Tiange finally sighed. No, you're very good. In the end, that old guy still got his way. He probably didn't have good intentions when he suggested that in the beginning, right? Fine, I should be happy that someone is good to Jinji. As for that old guy, don't think he really won. Chapter 227. After they talked about their feelings after parting, Yijinji looked at Mo Tiange and mumbled. He wanted to say something but couldn't. Mo Tiange was puzzled. What? Is there something you want to say? What can't you say to me? Yijinji looked at her awkwardly and said carefully, Auntie, you're back, so I should also come back. But Master treats me so well. If I leave as soon as you come back, wouldn't that be bad? So that's the problem. Mo Tiange smiled. It's good that you have the heart. Now that you're not a child and a foundation-building cultivator, there's no reason for you to live in my small cave. Besides, he's your master, so you should serve him. But Auntie, you... Yijinji hesitated. I don't want you to live alone. Mo Tiange shook her head. I'm not a child. Besides, I'm about to enter closed-door meditation to advance to the core formation realm, which will take at least 20 to 30 years. Even if you come back, I can't take care of you. You don't have to feel embarrassed. You should go back, Mo Tiange said faintly. Since your master treats you well, you should also fulfill your filial duties as a disciple. I'm busy forming my gold core now, so I really can't take care of you. All right. Yijinji was in a dilemma, but in the end, he listened to her. All right, you've been here for a long time. You should go back now. Got it, Auntie. You just came back, so rest well. I'll come and see you when I have time. Mo Tiange nodded with a smile and watched him leave. Mo Tiange was the only one left in the room. Her smile disappeared and she sat in silence for a while. All kinds of feelings flashed through her heart, but in the end, she just sighed. Forget it, forget it. In fact, it's better for Jinji this way, and she'll have fewer worries. Lord Daoist Jinghe waited for a long time, but no one came. He couldn't help but mutter, strange, why isn't she here yet? Mingxia, who was waiting on the side, asked, Grandmaster, what are you waiting for? Waiting for that unfilial, dead girl. Lord Daoist Jinghe waved his hand impatiently. She's still not here. Did she really change? Martial Uncle Mo. Mingxia was puzzled. Grandmaster, why did Martial Uncle Mo come? Don't you want her to rest? If I give Jinji to that brat, he'll definitely be angry. Lord Daoist Jinghe, who was holding a cup of tea, said with a frown, according to her previous personality, she'd definitely come to throw a tantrum if she was angry, but why didn't she come today? Mingxia was speechless. Having served this Grandmaster for decades, she certainly knew what kind of personality the Grandmaster had. But to wait for his own disciple to denounce him. Was this something a nascent soul Grandmaster would do? What kind of expression is that? Lord Daoist Jinghe glared at his maid. Mingxia said, Grandmaster, why do I feel like you just want to make Martial Uncle Mo angry? What good will it do her to be angry? Sigh, you don't understand. Lord Daoist Jinghe shook his head and said, I've lived for almost 1,000 years, if I don't find some fun for myself, life would be boring. Besides, that girl is a cultivation maniac. I don't want to teach her to be like our stinky brat. Failure once is enough, but she still taught such a disciple. That's my biggest failure. Mingxia blinked her eyes. Why do I feel like you actually want to be a matchmaker? Lord Daoist Jinghe was speechless for a long time after Mingxia hit the nail on the head. Seeing that there was no one around, Mingxia mustered her courage and asked, Grandmaster, didn't you say in the past that the people of the Dao sect who don't engage in dual cultivation have their own benefits? Without any worries, their mental states will be more peaceful. Lord Daoist Jinghe rubbed his nose and said, dual cultivation also has its advantages. Besides, this matter has to be looked at in detail. That stinky brat obviously has a knot in his heart, so I might as well help him. Knot in his heart. Help him. Mingxia didn't understand, but Lord Daoist Jinghe didn't plan to answer. He scratched his head and said, enough. Go take a look at what that girl is doing. Is she really not angry at all? Angry? Mo Tiange asked herself. Of course she couldn't not be angry. This master of hers clearly wanted to scheme against her. But after thinking about it carefully, she felt it was better to entrust Jinji to someone else in her current state. Now that she was about to form her gold core, there were too many things she had to do. Jinji was already in the foundation building realm, so there wasn't much she could do for him. That being the case, why should she be angry with that unreliable master? It wouldn't benefit her and would only make other people happy for nothing. Mo Tiange collected her thoughts and rested for a few days. During this time, she casually dismissed the maids who came to inquire about her. After the incident at Bishuan Court, she had never longed to advance and become stronger as much as she did now. Later, Yi Jingwen, Luo Fengxue, Han Qingyu, and even Kuang Zhu and the others all sent her summoning talismans to ask about her. Mo Tiange went to visit them one by one. Yi Jingwen's cultivation went smoothly and he was already in the late stage of the foundation building realm. Although Luo Fengxue didn't make any progress in her cultivation, she became the chief steward of Sweet Du Peak and was like a fish in water. Like her, Han Qingyu and Kuang Zhu were already in the peak stage of the foundation building realm and were waiting to form their gold cores. Zhanbai couldn't advance, so he was in closed-door meditation. His two sworn brothers and sisters, Xiaoguzi and Xiaozue, failed to build their foundations several times and were now ordered by Kuang Zhu to enter closed-door meditation. They weren't allowed to leave until they built their foundations. By the time she finished her visits, Mo Tiange already had a better understanding of the reason why all foundation-building disciples were summoned back to the school. Martial uncle Xianyin moved to Sweet Dew Peak. As his disciple, Luo Fengxue was also good at managing things, so all the affairs on Sweet Dew Peak were now handled by her. Regarding this matter, Luo Fengxue secretly leaked some information to her. As it turned out, during the school's major competition 20 years ago, when two core formation martial uncles were having a competition, they accidentally caused the mountain wall to collapse and unexpectedly discovered that there was an extremely secret magic formation hidden in the valley of the main peak. After some investigation, the school head and several core formation elders believed that this magic formation was set up at least more than 100,000 years ago, so they immediately reported this matter to the grandmasters of each peak. Xianqing School had been established for several tens of thousands of years, and it had produced countless astonishing and outstanding people. This formation was actually located deep inside the main peak of Mount Taikang and hadn't been discovered for several tens of thousands of years. This was too inconceivable. Mo Tiange pondered for a moment, then asked Luo Fengxue, more than 100,000 years ago, could it be left behind from the Middle Ages era? Luo Fengxue nodded, then shook her head. Several martial uncles have seen it. That's indeed what they think, but they're not sure. According to legend, after several million years in the distant past era, the human world was almost destroyed during the Great War between the Immortals and the Devils. Only a few people survived, and the Immortals and Devils were separated from the human world. From then on, it was known as the Middle Ages era. Mo Tiange once heard Lord Daoist Jinghe talk about this ancient legend. Lord Daoist Jinghe believed that the world came from nothing and that God had always been adjusting the rules of the human world. In the distant past era, God was also in the human world. Later, they discovered that it was best for God not to interfere with the development of the human world, so God left the human world. Then, at the end of the distant past era, the Great War between the Immortals and the Devils led to a catastrophe. This period of time was known as the Death of Gods. Because the etiquette in the human world collapsed, demons and devils ran amok, but God didn't care, so the human world was almost destroyed. In the end, the Immortals and Devils who cultivated and achieved the Tao also left the human world. Then came the Middle Ages era. There were no God, Immortals, or Devils, but there was abundant spiritual aura and resources like in the distant past era. As a result, cultivators and devil cultivators developed too fast, so the righteous and devil cultivators fought again. This time, the world changed and the sea turned into mulberry fields. Later, the human world finally stabilized. There was no more rich spiritual aura and natural treasures that could be seen everywhere. Whether it was cultivators or devil cultivators, they all struggled to survive. There was no longer any news of people ascending. Righteous and devil cultivators still fought, but they no longer had the power to destroy the world. In the end, Lord Daoist Jinghe said, God is the ruler of the world, while immortals and devils represent good and evil. Good and evil can't coexist since ancient times, so they're natural enemies. Although God doesn't care about the human world anymore, everything in the human world is in their hands. The power of immortals and devils is too great, so they separated the immortal world and the devil world and let the world be destroyed. Cultivators and devil cultivators are too powerful, so when the Middle Ages era ended, the world changed and the world no longer had abundant spiritual aura. From the moment the world was born, if the development of the human world wasn't satisfactory, it would be destroyed and rebuilt. We're all puppets in God's hands. Even if we're successful in our cultivation, we'll just be higher-level puppets. These words were indeed shocking to foundation-building cultivators. Mo Tiange thought for a long time and asked, then why do we cultivate? What if we can't achieve the great Tao in the end? Lord Daoist Jinghe said, silly girl, even high-level puppets are better than low-level puppets. Besides, the great Tao isn't necessarily hopeless. This is just master's deduction. You've seen deification cultivators. Are they happy? She remembered Zhong Muling and Yuan Bao and said hesitantly, they said, they're already equivalent to God in the human world. Correct. The world will always be destroyed and rebuilt, but what does that have to do with us? The distant past era has been millions of years, and the Middle Ages era has been hundreds of thousands of years. Can we live that long? We're not deification cultivators, so how do we know we can't achieve the great Tao? After we become deification, if we can become immortals and reach the immortal world, can we seek the next step? Can we cultivate and become God in the end? In the end, Lord Daoist Jing has said, as long as there's hope for the great Tao, it's worth fighting for. What does the change in the world have to do with us? In the Middle Ages era, the spiritual aura was as abundant as in the distant past era. Many things were inherited from the distant past era and were extremely powerful. After discovering this magic formation, several martial uncles and I immersed ourselves in studying it for more than 10 years. In the end, we finally discovered that this magic formation was used by a certain cultivation group in the Middle Ages era to train its disciples. Luo Fengxue pulled Mo Tiange back from her thoughts. She pondered for a moment and asked, what can we get from here? Luo Fengxue said, spiritual plants. Mo Tiange was stunned. After so many years, these spiritual plants can't be used anymore, right? Luo Fengxue smiled. That's not true. In fact, this magic formation doesn't reward disciples with spiritual plants. After more than 100,000 years, those things can't be used anymore. Instead, the spiritual plants growing inside might be very ordinary at that time, but after more than 100,000 years, they're the most precious treasures. I see. Mo Tiange pondered for a moment then asked, in the distant past era, there must have been a lot of high-level cultivators. Why did they want us, foundation-building disciples, to go? Luo Fengxue said, Tiange, don't forget that high-level cultivators back then were much more powerful than they are now. This magic formation automatically adjusts the difficulty of the disciples who enter according to their cultivation levels. Several martial uncles have tried it, but nascent soul and core formation cultivators couldn't pass many tests. Foundation-building disciples, on the other hand, managed to pass a bit more. Chapter 228. Mo Tiange thought about it and understood what Luo Fengxue meant. In the Middle Ages, spiritual aura and materials were richer than today's, so although those cultivators were in the same realm as today's cultivators, their methods were much more powerful. In particular, cultivators in the core formation realm and above could unleash the full power of magic weapons, and the materials used in those magic weapons were much better than today's. Therefore, core formation and nascent soul cultivators were much weaker than cultivators in the Middle Ages, which was why they couldn't move an inch inside this magic formation. On the other hand, foundation-building cultivators couldn't unleash the full power of magic weapons even if they used magic weapons, so the gap between them and cultivators in the Middle Ages was smaller. Since that's the case, it's enough to select the foundation-building disciples with high cultivation. Why summon all the foundation-building disciples back? Luo Fengxue said with a smile, this magic formation is very powerful. In the past dozen years, martial uncles have studied it for a long time, but they still couldn't figure out the principle behind it. Once you enter the formation, there will be many forks in the road. We just want the spiritual plants growing inside, not the reward for passing the test, so the more disciples who enter the formation, the better. Mo Tiange asked again, from what you said, entering this magic formation won't be dangerous. Then why don't you let everyone enter? Luo Fengxue shook her head. The activation of this magic formation only depends on the cultivation level of the person with the highest cultivation level. If a core formation cultivator enters, its power will greatly increase, so it's best to let a group of cultivators in the same realm enter. In fact, we also thought about letting aura refining disciples enter in the beginning, but perhaps aura refining disciples weren't considered beginners in the Middle Ages, so they couldn't even enter the entrance of the magic formation. I see. Mo Tiange murmured. A well-preserved magic formation from the Middle Ages with ancient spiritual plants growing inside was a huge opportunity for Xianqing School's development. It was no wonder those martial uncles couldn't calm down and directly summoned all the foundation-building disciples back. Luo Fengxue said, but Tiange, you still have to prepare some things. Although this magic formation doesn't hurt people, if you don't pass it, you'll be transported out. The spiritual aura needed to activate this magic formation is really too much. The martial uncles estimated that this kind of large-scale activation can only happen once every 50 years. Moreover, the reward this time is quite generous. Medicinal pills will be distributed according to the amount of spiritual plants you collect. The more tests you pass, the more spiritual plants you can collect, and the more rewards you'll get. I understand. Mo Tiange thanked him, then returned to Clear Spring Peak. Since this was the inside story, a disciple in the peak stage of the foundation building realm like her was definitely someone the school had high hopes for. In that case, she really had to prepare a bit more. After all, she couldn't lose her master's face. With these thoughts in mind, Zhang Xian walked toward Shangqing Palace. Before he reached the entrance, he heard a voice coming from the entrance. Who are you? How dare you stop me? A domineering and arrogant woman's voice rang out. Mo Tiange was astonished. There was actually someone in Shangqing Palace who dared to make such a racket. Raising his head to look, he saw a woman in her 20s scolding the gatekeeper disciple in a domineering manner. Looking at her cultivation, she was only at the middle stage of foundation establishment. The disciple glared at the woman and said coldly, Who are you, senior sister? This is Grandmaster Jinghe's Immortal's cave. Without being summoned, no one is allowed to enter. Even if they weren't elite disciples, those who were able to guard the door for their grandmaster were the cream of the crop among the ordinary disciples. It would be strange if they weren't annoyed by this woman's arrogant attitude. Who am I? The woman pointed at her own nose and said angrily, I haven't been back for several decades, yet you already don't know who I am. Nevertheless, the gatekeeper disciple still refused to retreat even half a step. He stared at her coldly and said, Senior sister, please leave. If you keep acting like this, I'll have no choice but to drive you out. You, upon hearing the word drive, the woman flew into a rage. But before she could get angry, the gatekeeper disciple saw Mo Tiange approaching. His smile changed and he said politely and respectfully, Martial Uncle Mo, you're back. Mo Tiange nodded and said, N. She then walked inside. The gatekeeper disciple naturally wouldn't stop her, but just as Mo Tiange took a step, a shout came from behind her, You're not allowed to enter. Mo Tiange turned her head. It was this arrogant woman. Before she could say anything, the gatekeeper disciple already shouted, Senior sister, you can't be rude to Martial Uncle Mo. The woman's face was completely red. She looked both angry and angry. Her gaze swept over Mo Tiange, but it was filled with hostility. Who is she? Why can she enter? The gatekeeper disciple said coldly, This is Martial Uncle Mo, Grandmaster's disciple. Of course she can enter. What? The woman was shocked. Her hostility towards Mo Tiange became even stronger. Mo Tiange didn't feel like saying anything. She just turned around and entered Shangqing Palace. No matter who this person was, her arrogant and domineering appearance was really annoying, so she didn't feel like paying attention to her. She bypassed the screen wall and stepped into the hall, only to see Lord Daoish Jinghe chatting and laughing with Wei Yu and Qingxue. "Master," she called out. Lord Daoish Jinghe turned his head and said, "Oh." He then continued to say, "There was one time when Grandmaster saw an old woman in Shisha. She was really funny. Her face was obviously full of wrinkles, but she always held her orchid-shaped fingers and thought her beauty was unparalleled." As he spoke, he even imitated other people's orchid-shaped fingers and said angrily, "Hateful." Mo Tiange instantly had goosebumps all over her body. This master. Doesn't he feel ashamed doing this kind of thing? Wei Yu and Qingxue naturally didn't think so. The two of them giggled and even urged him, "Grandmaster, what else?" Mo Tiange's face darkened. "Master." Lord Daoish Jinghe finally looked her in the eye. He said with dissatisfaction, "Master, I'm talking happily. If you have something to say, say it later." Mo Tiange glared at Wei Yu and Qingxue, signaling them to leave. Although Wei Yu and Qingxue were reluctant, Martial Uncle Mo's prestige from back then was still there, so they bowed and were about to leave. "Wait." Mo Tiange stopped them. "It's noisy outside. Go take a look. If there's nothing else, dismiss them." There was a formation at the door, so the two of them didn't know what was going on outside. Upon hearing what Mo Tiange said, they hurriedly answered, "Yes." After the two maids left, Lord Daoish Jinghe felt even more bored. He snorted and said, "What? If you have something to say, say it quickly." "Master, who's that person outside?" Wei Yu and Qingxue were just maids, so they didn't dare to spread their divine senses at will. However, this was Shangqing Palace on Clear Spring Peak. She wouldn't believe Lord Daoish Jinghe didn't know anything about what was going on outside. "Oh, that girl." Lord Daoish Jinghe picked up a few peanuts and tossed them around. "Don't mind her. She hasn't made any progress in dozens of years. Let her get the cold shoulder for once." Although he looked like he didn't care, Mo Tiange saw the sadness in his eyes. Thinking of that woman's behavior and what the two of them said, she had a rough idea of what was going on. If that was the case, she shouldn't care about this matter, so she didn't say much. Instead, she asked, "Master, I heard from Qingxue that they called us back this time because a magic formation was found in the valley on the main peak. At that time, all the foundation building disciples are going to go in and collect spiritual plants, right?" "Oh, Qingxue told you." Lord Daoish Jinghe finally looked at her. He pointed at the chair in front of him and asked her to sit down. "Then what do you think?" "Of course it depends on what Master thinks." Mo Tiange picked up a book on the small table and flipped through it. "Do you want me to show off my invincible might, or do you want me to remain silent? Say it." Lord Daoish Jinghe was a bit interested in her appearance. "You're very confident. As your disciple, how can I not be confident?" What she said made Lord Daoish Jinghe very happy. "It seems you've made a lot of progress in the past 20-odd years. Tell me, what happened?" "Master, didn't you say I'd be fine as long as you felt my meridians and I didn't need to ask anything?" Lord Daoish Jinghe glared at her. "Damn girl, don't say it if you don't want to say it." "Humph, there wasn't even a message from you for more than 20 years. Fortunately, I asked for your blood essence before I left, otherwise, I would have thought you died outside." Mo Tiange said helplessly, "I really almost died outside. It's not that I didn't want to send a message back, but I was trapped for 20 years and couldn't move. What could I do?" "Trapped for 20 years?" Lord Daoish Jinghe raised his eyebrows, looking quite interested. "What happened? What were you trapped by for 20 years?" Thus, Mo Tiange roughly told him what happened in the past 22 years. In the end, when she mentioned Bishuan Court inviting her to be a guest elder, she asked, "Master, what I did shouldn't violate the school's rules, right? In any case, I'm just a guest elder, I don't need to manage things." Lord Daoist Jinghe listened with great interest and waved his hand. "You're just a guest elder of a small cultivation group, what's the matter? You said that devil cultivator can actually cultivate dead aura." "Yes, and he can also use dead aura to attack. I remember when I first met him, he was only in the late stage of the foundation building realm, but after he was surrounded by dead aura, his cultivation level soared to the core formation realm, and his cultivation level even soared again in fights of magical power." "Master, there's actually such an evil technique in this world. If that's the case, isn't the cultivation level of devil cultivators much higher than cultivators of the righteous path?" Lord Daoist Jinghe frowned and pondered while shaking his head. "No, that person isn't an ordinary devil cultivator. In the past, I've also been to the territory of devil cultivators. Although most of the devil cultivators' cultivation techniques are strange and many of them are life-threatening, I've never heard of anyone cultivating dead aura. The person you're talking about is an anomaly, so the problem should be with his cultivation technique. Did you get the stone tablet with the cultivation technique recorded on it? Take it out and let me take a look." Mo Tiange paused for a moment then said, "I don't dare to take it out directly. Master, please wait, I'll think of a way." In fact, she threw the stone tablet into the virtual sky world, so she couldn't take it out right away. Fortunately, Lord Daoist Jinghe didn't doubt her. "All right. In addition, Master, can I prepare to form my gold core?" Lord Daoist Jinghe said, "It's fine as long as you feel it's right. When this matter is over, you can enter closed-door meditation. At that time, I'll take this opportunity to get you some medicinal pills. With your current cultivation level, I reckon you'll be able to reach the peak stage of the foundation building realm in 10 or 20 years. At that time, you'll be able to form your gold core steadily. Ha! My clear spring peak should produce another genius disciple." At this point, he stroked his beard complacently. Mo Tiange was just about to say something when she saw Weiyu coming in with a distressed expression. Weiyu shouted, "Grandmaster, that woman is so unreasonable." Chapter 229. If she was really that woman, she'd certainly be unreasonable. Mo Tiange looked up and saw Lord Daoist Jinghe, who was smiling just a moment ago, saying faintly, "Let her in." "Grandmaster." Weiyu was dumbfounded, but she quickly reacted and said, "Yes." Mo Tiange should have taken her leave, but she really wanted to watch the show, so she shamelessly ignored Lord Daoist Jinghe's gaze and stayed. He glared at her, but she didn't respond, so Lord Daoist Jinghe didn't feel like paying attention to her. Not long after Weiyu left, she saw the woman rushing in from the door. When she saw Lord Daoist Jinghe, her eyes turned red and she ran towards him with a sobbing tone. "Grandmaster." She ran to Lord Daoist Jinghe, knelt down with a plop, then grabbed his clothes and looked up with tears in her eyes. "Grandmaster, Mo Tiange saw that Lord Daoist Jinghe's expression was indifferent at first, but when the woman knelt and cried in front of him, his expression slowly softened. In the end, he sighed helplessly and gently pulled her up. "Mingzhu, it's been so many years. Do you know your mistakes?" While wiping her tears, the woman choked and said, "Grandmaster, I know my mistakes. I missed you so much when I was outside, and I regret it so much. It's good if you really know your mistakes." Lord Daoist Jinghe let her sit next to him and said seriously, "Tell me, where did you go wrong?" The woman wiped her tears and said, "I shouldn't have lost my temper, I shouldn't have fought with my fellow disciples, and..." She bit her lip. "I shouldn't have stopped others from getting close to senior martial brother, and I shouldn't have had delusions. Grandmaster, I really know my mistakes. Don't let me stay outside alone again, okay? Senior Marshal Brother. Mo Tiange raised her eyebrows. Feng Shui shouldn't be wrong about what happened. Whether it was according to cultivation level or seniority, shouldn't she call him Marshal Uncle? Lord Daoist Jinghe's expression softened and he said earnestly, we cultivators should know the principle of the heart moving at will and the mind maintaining tranquility. It's not that we shouldn't have affection or abandon the idea of love, but we shouldn't be obsessed and shouldn't fall into a demonic barrier. Do you understand this? The woman lowered her head, crying as she nodded. Lord Daoist Jinghe originally wanted to say more, but upon seeing Mo Tiange's current appearance, he eventually shook his head and said, you should have come back for the disciple gathering this time, so you can't be considered leaving without permission. Go back to your Zhili house. It's still the same as when you left. When Mo Tiange saw his face that was still shedding tears, she was instantly ecstatic. However, when she raised her head, she restrained herself a little. Grandmaster, you're still treating me so well. Lord Daoist Jinghe reached out and stroked her head. There was nostalgia and sadness on his face. You're the child I watched grow up. All right, you should go rest. When things are settled, you can go back to Yungang Mountain Courtyard. The woman was startled. Grandmaster, I still have to return. Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled faintly, his face devoid of any extra expression. You should go rest. You must be very tired after rushing back from such a long distance. If you have anything to say it later. The woman's expression changed. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, she held back. She stood up and bowed. Grandmaster, I'll be leaving first. Lord Daoist Jinghe nodded then closed his eyes, looking like he was meditating. The woman had no choice but to clench her teeth and leave. When Mo Tiange saw the contemptuous and jealous expression on Lord Daoist Jinghe's face when he passed her, she picked up the cup of tea on the table then lowered her head and sipped it expressionlessly. When the footsteps disappeared and the hall became quiet again, Lord Daoist Jinghe finally opened his eyes. His gaze was filled with sadness as he stared at the way the woman disappeared. This was the first time Mo Tiange saw this playful master of hers reveal such a sad expression. For a split second, she suddenly felt jealous of the woman who just left. Although her master never put on airs in front of her and allowed her to be impolite, he never looked at her with this kind of gaze. Such a gaze when looking at a precious child. She knew that no matter how well her master treated her, in his heart, he probably still wasn't as good as that woman. Realizing what she was thinking, Mo Tiange smiled self-deprecatingly. 2 days ago, she was jealous of Jinji, but today, she was jealous of her master again. What was wrong with her? Not to mention that she shouldn't be obsessed with this, but why should Jinji and her master treat her more seriously? For more than 20 years, she wasn't the one who taught Jinji, and she wasn't raised by her master. Tiange, Lord Daoist Jinghe suddenly said. Mo Tiange was stunned for a while before she finally looked up. Master. Do you know who she is? Mo Tiange frowned slightly. I think she should be Senior Marshal Brother Qingyuan's daughter. Correct. Lord Daoist Jinghe wasn't surprised that she guessed it at all. He leaned back on his dragon chair, his gaze falling on the void. That was more than 100 years ago. At that time, I hadn't advanced to the middle stage of the nascent soul realm for long. I wanted to go further on the path to immortality, so I often went out to look for fated chances. For this reason, several of my disciples also often put aside their cultivation to run errands for me. Although Qingyuan was my disciple, his aptitude wasn't very good. Back then, I saw that his aptitude was ordinary but he cultivated diligently, so I took pity on him and accepted him as my disciple. That child was honest and always felt that he could form his gold core because I took care of him, so he respected me the most and always did his best to do things for me. One time, when Qin Yuan went out, he accidentally encountered a 10,000-year-old tieli tree. He knew I wanted tieli fruits, so he went to pick them. Unexpectedly, there was an 8th-ranked demonic beast guarding next to the tieli tree. At this point, Lord Daoist Jinghe closed his eyes. I saw his longevity lamp go out, so I went to look for him and found that he didn't even have a corpse left. Mo Tiange was stunned. An 8th-ranked demonic beast was equivalent to the early stage of the nascent soul realm. This senior martial brother was only in the core formation realm, so how could he defeat it? No wonder Master tolerated that arrogant grand disciple so much. It turned out that her father died for Master. Master. Mo Tiange whispered, "You're telling me this because..." Lord Daoist Jinghe showed a bitter smile. "Do you think I don't know that child Mingzhu's personality? She lost her father when she was a child because of me, and I didn't teach her well. In fact, I really owed her. After I took her back, I spoiled her too much and fostered her arrogant personality. Although I knew she was in the wrong, I couldn't bear to discipline her until she attacked a fellow disciple." Mo Tiange once heard Luo Fengxue talk about this matter. Wei Jiaxi was seriously injured by this person, and the reason was only because Wei Jiaxi accepted an errand to serve senior martial brother Shoujing. The child she injured was Xuaning's disciple and also my grand disciple. No matter how much I loved Mingzhu, I couldn't be too biased, so I had to punish Mingzhu heavily and ruthlessly control her. But I spoiled her rotten a long time ago, so she couldn't change no matter what. In fact, she even became worse and didn't know how to repent. I was extremely disappointed. In a fit of anger, I ordered her to go to a courtyard thousands of miles away from here and told her that she wasn't allowed to return to the mountain without a summon. Mo Tiange listened in silence for a while, then asked, "Master, do you want me to be lenient with her?" Lord Daoist Jinghe stared at her, then said with a sigh, "You're a smart person. You must have clearly understood what I meant just now. It's been 60 years since I ordered her to go to the courtyard. That child should have suffered a lot, but looking at her now, how could she show even the slightest bit of remorse? It's been 60 years. The disciples guarding the gate and my maids have all been replaced, so how could I possibly recognize her? She came back, but she didn't tell anyone to report to me and just kept pestering me." Mo Tiange carefully calculated in her heart. This nominal martial nephew of hers was probably 160 or 70 years old, right? Such behavior was indeed too willful. Although her master treated her gently just now, his attitude was distant. Moreover, her martial uncle was also present, but her master didn't let her greet him. Obviously, he didn't intend to let her come back. Thinking up to this point, Mo Tiange felt her jealousy was unreasonable. I understand. She'll only stay for a while. Even if she does something excessive, I'll just ignore it. Lord Daoist Jinghe felt slightly gratified. She was raised by me. Even your senior martial brother Shoujing can't compare to her. How could I not feel distressed seeing her come back like this? It's been 60 years, so if she knew she was wrong, I'd let her come back. But she missed this opportunity. Her attitude is still arrogant, her cultivation level hasn't improved in the slightest, and she even learned to deceive me. For her father's sake, I won't treat her unfairly with medicinal pills or magic weapons, but she can forget about coming back to Mount Taikong in the future. Upon seeing the cold expression on her master's usually smiling face, Mo Tiange knew he was really angry. That woman was really stupid. She pretended to be tearful in front of her master, but she didn't know how to hide her expression. How could a dignified nascent soul cultivator be easily fooled? This kind of stupidity, thinking herself smart, was more terrifying than simply not being smart. Master, don't be too sad. This matter really can't be blamed on you. She grew up with Senior Marshal Brother Shojing, but isn't Senior Marshal Brother Shojing doing well? Whether it's the path of cultivation or the path of life, one has to walk on their own. If they don't make progress, what else can they do? Lord Daoist Jinghe shook his head. How could he not know Mo Tiange was trying to comfort him? Teaching in accordance with her aptitude. Master doesn't know how to educate a child. I always thought it was okay to spoil her a little since she was a girl, so she made mistakes again and again. Forget it, forget it. I've given her so many chances, but she didn't repent at all and even learned to play tricks. Since that's the case, I'll let her stay in the other courtyard for the rest of her life. When she changes, I'll let her come back. Although he said that, Mo Tiange knew Lord Daoist Jinghe had given up. She didn't know whether she should feel jealous or sympathetic towards that woman. Her master said so many things, hoping she could be a little more tolerant. Obviously, he still loved her very much, but the implication was that he would let her spend the rest of her life in the other courtyard and was too lazy to even remind her of her mistakes. No matter how much he loved a child, if she was unwilling to repent over and over again, his doting heart would eventually turn cold. After not seeing her for 60 years, he originally hoped she could change a little bit, but the result was still the same. How could he not be disappointed? Mo Tiange asked herself. If she were in his shoes, she probably wouldn't even want to see her anymore, let alone her master who treated her so gently. Her master usually didn't behave properly, but he was so sad because of her. It could be seen how much he loved her in the past, but she didn't know how to cherish her good fortune. This woman really wasn't pitiful at all. Chapter 230. What amused Mo Tiange was that another woman came to Shangqing Palace, and she was even the arrogant and despotic kind. Mei Mei, Lan, Zhu Zhu, Qin, Qi, Hua, and Hua. Those people finally understood her good points, so they immediately changed their personalities and ran to her every 2 or 3 days. Not only did they inform her, but they also fanned the flames. Afterward, not only did she know everything about this woman, but she also knew what she did every day, who she met, and why she got angry. This nominal martial niece was called Ruan Mingzhu. When Senior Marshal Brother Qing Yuan died, she was only 5 or 6 years old. At an age when she didn't understand anything, she was taken to her master's side and taught by him personally. At the same time, her master returned to the Qin clan in the secular world and took back Senior Marshal Brother Shojing. The two of them were about the same age. They cultivated and lived together since they were little. One lived in Mingxin residence while the other lived in the Zhili building next door. They could be said to be childhood sweethearts. After living together for several decades, Ruan Mingzhu naturally thought Senior Marshal Brother Shojing would always be with her. Who knew that Senior Marshal Brother Shojing actually had a dull personality? Normally, he always immersed himself in cultivation and ignored her good intentions. She was annoyed and wanted her grandmaster, who loved her, to make decisions for her, but it was useless for others to make decisions for her. As the two of them gradually grew up, the difference in their cultivation levels and temperaments became bigger and bigger. Senior Marshal Brother Shojing gradually stopped paying attention to her. If he wasn't immersed in cultivation, he would travel around and never stay in the cave. Ruan Mingzhu had long been accustomed to everything being hers. Whenever she wanted something, her grandmaster who loved her would immediately give it to her. How could she stand Senior Marshal Brother Shojing ignoring her? The more she couldn't get something, the more she wanted it. However, the distance between them grew bigger and bigger as their cultivation levels fell apart. After they advanced to the core formation realm, Senior Marshal Brother Shojing moved out of Shangqing Palace. Ruan Mingzhu didn't think she should cultivate diligently, but she kept making things difficult for the female disciples who worked for Senior Marshal Brother Shojing. In the end, it finally led to a disaster. These words were passed to her by Shuqin and the others. They didn't like this senior martial sister Wan, but they couldn't do anything because they were hindered by their grandmaster, so they hoped Mo Tiange would take the lead and teach her a lesson. Unfortunately, Mo Tiange didn't listen at all. She just immersed herself in her own business, making them very disappointed. Of course, she knew Wan Mingzhu was very angry because her master wouldn't let her come back, so she kept causing trouble to the maids. However, she had already promised her master that she could only pretend to be deaf and mute. Besides, Wan Mingzhu didn't provoke her, so why would she look for trouble with her? Since this matter didn't concern her, Mo Tiange had always been very calm. Martial Uncle Mo, I heard this senior martial sister Wan calls martial uncle Shoujing senior martial brother. Mo Tiange, who was sitting in front of Mingxin Residence's pool, held Feifei in her arms and fed it. She uttered a nonchalant "N." Seeing that she didn't respond, Qingqi rolled her eyes and continued, I heard that Grandmaster wanted senior martial sister Wan to change her way of addressing him, but senior martial sister Wan refused even if she died. Martial uncle Shoujing didn't care either. Mo Tiange continued to calmly respond with an N. Shuqin had no choice but to ask, Martial Uncle Mo, do you have any ideas? Mo Tiange fed a spirit fruit to Feifei, then let it wander on its own. She then said, I don't have any thoughts. Shuqin and Qingqi looked at each other, unwilling to give up. Don't you think that senior sister Wan is too, that? Unfortunately, Mo Tiange just stared at them with a faint smile on her face. It was only after she stared at them that she finally said, then what do you want? Do you want me to teach her a lesson? Shuqin and Qingqi chuckled, then whispered, this senior martial sister Wan is very dissatisfied with you, martial uncle. She heard that you're living in Mingxin Residence now and almost smashed her own house. Although she endured it in the end, she's been cursing you behind your back. Right. Qingqi took over the conversation. I heard everything that day. Senior martial sister Wan said you're just a foundation building cultivator, so why did Grandmaster look at you differently? Why did you have to worship Grandmaster as your master? Why did you have to live in Mingxin Residence? She also said that you think highly of yourself and that Grandmaster likes her the most. While listening to Shuqin and Qingqi's gossip, Mo Tiange flipped through the book in her hand. When she heard this, she finally looked up. Shuqin and Qingqi were secretly delighted, thinking they managed to persuade her. Unexpectedly, Mo Tiange just said, don't you think Master doesn't know you're gossiping here? Ah. Shuqin and Qingqi paused, speechless. How could matters in Shangqing Palace escape Grandmaster's eyes? It all depended on Grandmaster's attitude. Mo Tiange smiled, then stood up and knocked on their shoulders with her book. Why are you paying so much attention to someone who's going to leave sooner or later? She thinks she's smart, so why are you so stupid? Shuqin and Qingqi glanced at each other and suddenly understood. They immediately smiled and said, Martial Uncle Mo, thank you for your advice. Mo Tiange waved her hand and said nothing, planning to go back to the cultivation room. But right at that moment, she heard a voice outside. Wow! What's this? It's so cute. Mo Tiange raised her head to look at the entrance of Mingxin Residence and frowned. When Shuqin and Qingqi saw this, they hurriedly walked out. Not long after, the voices of two people could be heard. Greetings to senior martial sister Wan. Wan Mingzhu's arrogant voice sounded as if they were calling her martial uncle. Senior martial sister Wan, Shuqin said, this is martial uncle Mo's spiritual beast. Wan Mingzhu's voice rose slightly. Really? What kind of spiritual beast is it? How come I've never seen it before? Qingqi answered, this is a Feifei. Martial Uncle Mo found it in the Eastern Sea. it's very rare. Fei. Ruan Mingzhu obviously hadn't heard of it. She said happily, it looks like a raccoon, its whole body is golden, so cute. Fei's appearance could be loved by all women. Its whole body was golden without a single strand of hair of other colors. It had round eyes, a pointed tail, and short limbs. It was also very intelligent. Even Xiaohua from back then couldn't compare to it in terms of cuteness. When Mo Tiange brought Fei home, Qin, Qi, Shu, Hua, and the others came to look at it from time to time. Fei had a gentle temperament and didn't get angry when they teased it, so it was very lovable. However, they knew Mo Tiange attached great importance to this spiritual beast, so even if they were teasing it, they were still careful. Now, they cautiously reminded her, Senior Martial Sister Wan, Fei is a second-rank spiritual beast. Of course I saw it. Ruan Mingzhu answered unhappily. After a while, she said, this is Martial Uncle Mo's. Where is she? When she called Martial Uncle Mo, she was very reluctant. When she asked where she was, she didn't seem to respect her at all. Qingqi said, Martial Uncle Mo is in Mingxin residence. Senior Martial Sister Ruan, do you want to pay a visit? Pay a visit. Ruan Mingzhu seemed to dislike this word. After a while, she finally said, all right. Mo Tiange thought Ruan Mingzhu would let Xuqin and Qingqi come in to report, but in the end, the door of Mingxin residence was immediately knocked open. Eldest young Miss Ruan Mingzhu directly walked in with Fei in her arms. Mo Tiange frowned. She saw Fei in her arms. With a single thought, Fei immediately broke free, jumped out of Ruan Mingzhu's arms and ran towards her. Hey! Ruan Mingzhu shouted, why are you running? She was about to chase after her. Mo Tiange held Fei with a faint gaze. Is there a problem? Seeing Fei jumping into Mo Tiange's arms and ignoring her, Ruan Mingzhu glared at her angrily for a while before she finally remembered her master. She slightly curbed her sloppiness and said, Martial Uncle Mo, can you give me this Fei? Although it was a question, from the way she addressed Fei to the content, there wasn't the slightest sincerity. From beginning to end, she didn't even salute. Mo Tiange said, this is my contractual spiritual beast. I'm afraid I can't. Upon hearing her refusal and seeing her cold attitude, Ruan Mingzhu immediately raised her brows and shouted, then cancel the contract. Mo Tiange still had no expression, but Xuqin and Qingqi cried out in alarm, Senior Martial Sister Ruan. In Kunwu, spiritual beasts generally recognized their masters before they were hatched. This kind of contract usually couldn't be cancelled in their entire lives. If they wanted to cancel it, the master's blood essence would be damaged. Ruan Mingzhu didn't know that the contract between her and Fei was a subordinate contract and not a master recognition contract, but she said it as if it was a matter of course. Unexpectedly, she didn't care about Fei's loss at all. Ruan Mingzhu, on the other hand, was completely unaware of this and continued to ask, how is it? Did you promise me? Mo Tiange wrinkled her brows and said slowly, Fei doesn't give it away. You, upon hearing what she said, Ruan Mingzhu's expression changed greatly. Perhaps because she recalled that things were no longer the same as before, her expression changed for a long time, but in the end, she endured it and said, Martial Uncle Mo, if you give me your spiritual beast, I'll ask Grandmaster to compensate you, okay? Her tone made the three people raise their eyebrows. Qingqi couldn't bear it anymore and shouted, Senior Martial Sister Wan, Grandmaster always grants Martial Uncle Mo every request. Whatever Martial Uncle wants, you only need to tell Grandmaster. These words, however, had the intention of showing off. Whatever Martial Uncle wanted, he could just ask Grandmaster. Why did he need her to ask? Ruan Mingzhu's expression changed. Qingqi's words obviously put her in a difficult position. She originally wanted to endure it, but in the end, she couldn't hold it anymore and said angrily, "Grandmaster has always doted on me. Isn't it just because I wasn't here for 60 years? You actually dare to look down on me? What's the big deal about a disciple who came in halfway? Do you think she's more important than me?" The corners of Mo Tianga's lips curled up. She was very clear about her master's attitude. In terms of importance, she indeed couldn't compare to Ruan Mingzhu in her master's heart. However, her master wasn't an unreasonable and biased person who didn't care what Ruan Mingzhu said. Besides, her master had clearly given up on her now, so how could he still indulge her? This Ruan Mingzhu. She was already more than 100 years old, but she still had this kind of personality. She really didn't know where she'd been living all this time. Xuqin and Qingqi didn't answer. It wasn't appropriate for two maids to say this kind of thing. However, they also didn't want to swallow their anger, so their gazes kept sweeping over Mo Tianga. Finally, Mo Tianga opened her mouth, living up to everyone's expectations. She said slowly, "Martial nephew Ruan, I won't give this spiritual beast to anyone. If you want it, go and ask your grandmaster yourself." Ruan Mingzhu originally called her Martial Uncle Mo out of reluctance. Now that she heard Mo Tianga calling her Martial nephew Ruan, as if it was a matter of course, she was extremely annoyed. Moreover, when she heard Mo Tianga stubbornly refusing to give Feifei to her anger burned even more fiercely. Ruan Mingzhu glared at her for a while, then said angrily, "Don't regret this." She then turned around and walked away. Seeing Ruan Mingzhu leaving in anger, Xuqin and Qingqi both looked as if their hatred had been vented. However, they heard Mo Tianga say slowly, "You too. Oh, I mean, the 16 of you can stop worrying. Don't think of using me to deal with her so you can vent your anger. Shangxing Palace's affairs have never been concealed from you. I'll also be honest, she won't be staying here for long, so for master's sake, don't trouble her anymore. Is it really necessary to deal with someone who's already been abandoned by master?" Chapter 231. Grand Master. Ruan Mingzhu ran into the main hall of Shangxing Palace, crying. Lord Daoist Jinghe was joking with a smile, but when he saw her coming in, his expression disappeared and he said faintly, "What happened?" With tears in her eyes, Ruan Mingzhu said, "Grandmaster, I didn't do it on purpose. I just thought Martial Uncle Mo's spiritual beast was very interesting, so I wanted to ask her for it. I didn't want to make her angry." Lord Daoist Jinghe slowly frowned. And then Ruan Mingzhu lowered her head to hide the hatred in her eyes. Martial Uncle Mo seemed very angry. Ruan Mingzhu looked up and saw Lord Daoist Jinghe sitting on the dragon chair leisurely picking up a cup of tea. Mingzhu. She didn't understand Grandmaster's attitude. Lord Daoist Jinghe looked at her indifferently. Tianga always treasures the things around her. Although you want a spiritual beast, she views it as a partner, so she's unwilling to give it to you. Ruan Mingzhu was stunned. She didn't expect Grandmaster to react like this. Lord Daoist Jinghe continued to say, "If you have nothing else to do, go back and cultivate. You're not young anymore, you still have several decades. If you can't form your gold core, it'll be difficult in the future." Ruan Mingzhu was startled when he suddenly mentioned core formation. "Grandmaster, don't you want to form your gold core?" Lord Daoist Jinghe looked at her with a sharp gaze. "How can I form my gold core if I have so many things in my heart? Tianga is much younger than you, and she wandered from place to place when she was young. She's already in the late stage of the foundation building realm now and will soon reach the peak stage of the foundation building realm. What about you? I've personally taught you since you were a child. You succeeded in building your foundation at the age of 21, so you should be a proud child. Why are you still in the middle stage of the foundation building realm now that you're more than 170 years old? What have you been doing for the past 60 years? Why haven't you made any progress? Lord Daoish Jinghe's expression became stern. Ruan Mingzhu's heart trembled, and she stuttered, Grandmaster. The spirit vein in Mount Yungang is too lousy. Cultivating there has no effect at all, really. Lord Daoish Jinghe still looked at her like that. What about the medicinal pills I sent you all these years? Although I didn't call you back, Grandmaster has never deducted your portion. Even if you forcefully eat medicinal pills, 60 years should be enough for you to reach the peak of the middle stage, right? Ruan Mingzhu lowered her head, not saying anything. Lord Daoish Jinghe's expression softened again. He said softly, all right, don't think about unrelated matters. Cultivate properly. This time, the sect has summoned the disciples back to the mountain for something important. If you can do it well, it will only be beneficial to you. Ruan Mingzhu was silent for a long time before she finally answered honestly. I understand, Grandmaster. When she rushed out of Shangqing Palace, Ruan Mingzhu's face was completely red. She saw the gatekeeping disciple looking at her with a probing expression and a hidden hostility in his eyes, so she said angrily, What are you looking at? Being berated by her, the disciple retracted his gaze. He didn't scold her back, but a look of disdain appeared on his face. Just as Ruan Mingzhu was about to lose her temper, she remembered this was the entrance of Shangqing Palace, so she clenched her teeth and endured it. With a wave of her hand, she tossed her flying magic tool into the air. Seeing her leave, the disciple who was guarding the door let out a soft harumph and mumbled, She really thinks she's something. Ruan Mingzhu flew to an uninhabited mountaintop. After looking at it for quite a while, she finally confirmed that was her destination. She landed on the ground and walked towards the well-hidden cave abode. Senior brother. Are you there? I'm Mingzhu. She called out twice, but she didn't hear a reply for a long time, so she continued to call out, Senior brother. Come out and meet me. I'm Mingzhu. After another long while, the door of the cave finally opened. She was overjoyed. Just as she was about to rush out, she was startled and her expression darkened. Who are you? The person who opened the door and came out was Yizhenji. When he saw Ruan Mingzhu, he was also stunned. Who are you? Ruan Mingzhu's expression darkened. She looked inside and asked, Where's my senior brother? Yizhenji touched his head then said strangely, Are you new here? Did you come to the wrong place? This is my senior brother's cave. Ruan Mingzhu glared at him. Brat, who are you? Why are you in my senior brother's cave? You're not my aunt, how could there be a senior brother of yours here? Although Yizhenji had a good temper, since the other party's tone was so harsh, he didn't hold back. You should quickly leave. Although my master is amiable, he'll also get angry if someone is so rude. Master. Ruan Mingzhu stuck her head out to take a look. A hint of a smile finally appeared on her face. You're my senior brother's disciple, right? Tell him I'm Mingzhu, he'll know. Seeing that Yizhenji didn't move, Ruan Mingzhu shouted again, Quickly go. She really didn't hold back when she ordered people around. Yizhenji was an honest man, so he didn't get angry. He merely frowned and said, Who's your senior brother? My master's cultivating. He'll get angry if you disturb him for no reason. Just as Ruan Mingzhu was about to get angry, she heard a familiar voice coming from inside the cave. Zhenji, let her in. Ruan Mingzhu was delighted. Senior martial brother. She then rushed into the cave. Hey, Yizhenji became even more confused upon seeing her like this. Who in the world was she? After Master, didn't Grandmaster only accept my aunt as his disciple? Where did this person pop out from and call Master Senior Martial Brother? However, since Master said so, it wasn't good for him to say anything. He closed the cave, then slowly walked back to the hall. After thinking for a moment, he didn't go back to his own cultivation room. Instead, he sat next to Xiaohua, who was curled into a ball uncultivating, pretending to look after the spiritual beast. In fact, Xiaohua was already a third-rank spiritual beast. Its cultivation level was always higher than his, so it didn't need him to look after it. During this time, Xiaohua had been immersed in cultivating. Master said it seemed it was going to make a realm breakthrough again, so he didn't send it back. The door to his master's cultivation room wasn't closed. Yixinji pricked up his ears to listen to the movements inside. Senior Martial Brother. Ruan Mingzhu was extremely excited to see Qin Shi. She rushed towards him with tears in her eyes. Senior Martial Brother, I finally get to see you again. Qin Shi, who was still cultivating, opened his eyes and faintly glanced at her. Mingzhu, whether it's in terms of cultivation level or seniority, you should call me Martial Uncle instead of Senior Martial Brother. Ruan Mingzhu was stunned for a moment, then a sad expression appeared on her face. Why? Why are you and Grandmaster treating me so coldly when I finally come back? It's been 60 years, can't you two forgive me? These are two different things. Qin Shi's tone was still cold, almost devoid of any emotion. In the past, we were young, so we let you call me whatever you want. But times are different now. You and I aren't children anymore, you should understand what you should do. But Senior Martial Brother will always be my Senior Martial Brother in my heart. Ruan Mingzhu blurted out, if my father wasn't Grandmaster's disciple and Grandmaster didn't accept me as his disciple, we'd be fellow apprentices. But that's the truth, Qin Shi said. It's been 60 years, yet you still haven't understood this principle. Don't blame Master for treating you coldly. Although his tone was calm, his words weren't polite at all. Ruan Mingzhu was stunned again. All of a sudden, she lowered her head and cried bitterly. After crying for a while, she said while sobbing, I really don't understand. I don't understand what I did wrong. Why are you and Grandmaster treating me like this? Didn't I just injure a disciple? We weren't the only ones fighting in the school, and that person was fine. You and Grandmaster left me alone in Yungang branch. That place was so remote, and everyone ignored me. I lived a very bitter life there. If she was crying and complaining in front of Lord Daoist Jinghe, she might have received some words of comfort. However, the person who was listening to her was Qin Shi. He was expressionless, as if the person crying in front of him was a wooden person, and he himself was also a wooden person. Ruan Mingzhu couldn't cry anymore, so she could only wipe her tears. With reddened eyes, she looked at him and pleaded softly, Senior Martial Brother, I finally came back. Can you ask Grandmaster not to drive me away? I won't cause trouble again. I'll listen to you in the future, okay? Qin Shi didn't say anything. It was as if he didn't hear anything. Ruan Mingzhu waited for a while, but she couldn't help but say, Senior Martial Brother, did you forget? When you first came, you always stayed in the back mountain alone. Every time, it was me who went to look for you before you were willing to come back. Speaking of the past, Qin Shi's gaze finally moved. Ruan Mingzhu thought he would soften his heart, but she still heard his cold voice. What's the use of saying this? If you were the Mingzhu from back then, how could Master let you go to the branch alone and not let you come back for 60 years? Ruan Mingzhu was dumbfounded. She said anxiously, Senior Martial Brother, don't you have any feelings for me now? We grew up together for almost 100 years. Don't you have any feelings for me? She stared at her and said quietly, I told you long ago that I only have the great Tao in my eyes. I don't think anything else is important. I don't have the things you want, so why do you have to force me? Senior Marshal Brother. Guan Mingzhu shouted. She stared blankly at his wooden expression, and tears rolled down from her eyes. I don't want you to respond to me. I only want you to be like before, to call me affectionately, to give me pointers on my cultivation, to chat with me when you're free. Is this also too much? Guan Mingzhu's tone was sorrowful when she said this. There was no arrogance or despotism, there was only the pain of not being able to get what she wanted. She suddenly felt pain. He felt like a certain part of him was touched. But he soon calmed down and said with a calm voice, Mingzhu, you still don't think you're wrong. Guan Mingzhu lowered her head then angrily shook her head. Isn't it just injuring a disciple? For us cultivators, what's the big deal about injuring one or two people? Haven't you and Grandmaster killed a lot of people? I still haven't. It's not because you injured someone. She interrupted her. You should strive to get what you can, but you should give up what you can't get. Because you can't get what you want, you vent your anger on others and even attack your fellow disciples. Don't you think your state of mind is already twisted? Master indulges you too much, indulges you so much that you want everything, but how can you get everything in this world? If you didn't have Master, what could you get? His tone was very flat, but the meaning behind his words was very strict. He stared at Guan Mingzhu without the slightest fluctuation in his gaze. Mingzhu, I'm not Master, I won't teach you what's right and what's wrong, but I know that you and I are two different people. Even if we grew up together, we still can't walk together in the end. Don't be stubborn. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.